The tension in the TagFlow Industries boardroom was suffocating as Jake Morrison stood with his fists clenched, staring at the woman who had once bled in his arms. Victoria Chen's immaculate suit contrasted sharply with the bloodied stranger he'd pulled from a wrecked Tesla 3 months earlier. Between them, the red knit scarf Sarah's last gift hung limply from Jake's hand. "You destroyed my life once," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of 3 years of grief. "I won't let you do the same to Millbrook." Marcus Webb's predatory smile widened as he slid the contract across the polished table. "Mr. Morrison, this agreement would solve all your financial difficulties." Jake looked from the contract to Victoria, searching her eyes for the woman who had helped Emma with her math homework. The woman he had started to love. "Some things aren't for sale," Jake said, dropping the red scarf onto the contract. "Not even for $5 million. 3 months earlier, the first snowfall of October shouldn't have happened in Millbrook, Vermont, but there it was, turning Route 4 into a treacherous ribbon of ice. Jake Morrison hunched over the steering wheel of his aging Ford pickup, the heater struggling against the windshield's growing frost. His daughter's parent-teacher conference had run late, and now darkness was falling with the unexpected snow. Emma's school folder sat on the passenger seat, filled with A- math tests and drawings of a family that always included a smiling stick figure floating above. "Mom in heaven," as Emma carefully labeled it. 3 years hadn't been enough to erase the hole Sarah's death had left, especially for an 8-year-old who still sometimes crawled into Jake's bed after nightmares. The headlights caught something wrong ahead, an unnatural angle of metal against the pristine snow. Jake slowed, then stopped completely when he recognized a car that had veered off the road and flipped onto its side among the birch trees. The overturned vehicle was a Tesla, its sleek black frame now dented and twisted. Steam rose from the crumpled hood, dissipating in the frigid air. Through the spider-webbed window, Jake saw a woman slumped unconscious against the airbag. Dark hair fanned across a face streaked with blood from a gash at her temple. Her clothes looked expensive, out of place in rural Millbrook. Jake pulled at the door until the crumpled metal gave way. He reached into his jacket pocket for the red knit scarf Sarah had made during her final months of chemotherapy. The intricate pattern had taken her 3 months to complete between treatments, when her fingers weren't too numb from pain to work the needles. He pressed the scarf gently against the woman's bleeding temple. "Hey," he said softly. "Can you hear me? Help's coming. Just stay with me." Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. Dark brown eyes, unfocused at first, locked onto his. Despite the circumstances, Jake noticed they were intelligent eyes, the kind that missed nothing. "The algorithm," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Battery management. Coefficient errors." Jake froze, his blood turning colder than the Vermont air. Those words, specific technical terms he hadn't heard in 3 years, not since his time as a senior engineer at TechFlow Industries, where he'd developed battery management systems for electric vehicles before his life imploded. "What did you say?" he asked, but the woman's eyes had closed again, her head heavy against his hand. Headlights approached, and Sheriff Dawson's patrol car pulled over its lights, casting blue patterns across the snow. "Morrison," Dawson called. "What have we got here?" "Single vehicle accident. Woman's unconscious but breathing. We need an ambulance." As Dawson radioed for help, Jake studied the stranger's face, wondering if he'd imagined those technical terms. No one connected to TechFlow would be in Millbrook, Vermont, population 30,000, where Jake had fled to escape the ruins of his former life. At Millbrook General Hospital, Jake sat in the waiting room, the blood-stained scarf clutched in his hands. Emma sat beside him, working on homework he'd picked up when he stopped home. "Is the lady going to be okay?" Emma asked, her pencil pausing over a math worksheet. "Doctor thinks so," Jake said, smoothing Emma's brown hair. "So like Sarah's. Just a concussion. Can we take her home for dinner? Mrs. Miller made too much meatloaf again." Jake smiled despite his exhaustion. Emma's immediate concern for others was pure Sarah, along with her stubbornness and dimpled smile. "She's staying here tonight, kiddo. Besides, we don't even know her." "But she's alone," Emma said, as if that settled everything. A doctor approached. "Mr. Morrison, the patient's awake and asking for you." In the hospital room, the woman sat propped up in bed, designer clothes replaced with scrubs, dark hair falling around shoulders that held themselves with unconscious authority. The cut on her temple had been stitched, but otherwise, she looked remarkably composed. Mr. Morrison, she said, extending a hand. I'm Vicky. Vicky Miller. Thank you for pulling me from my car. Jake shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip. Jake, anyone would have stopped. Not necessarily, she said with a smile that transformed her face. And certainly not everyone would have sacrificed what looks like a treasured possession to stop a stranger's bleeding. She gestured to the red scarf. Jake glanced down, embarrassed by both the bloodstain and his reluctance to part with it. It was what I had on hand, he said, tucking the scarf into his pocket. My car's totaled, isn't it? She asked. I own Morrison's garage in town. I know wrecked when I see it. A mechanic, she said, studying him with renewed interest. That explains the competent rescue. There was something about how she observed him, calculating, assessing, that made Jake uneasy, as if gathering data rather than making small talk. I'm afraid I'm stranded in your town for a few days, she continued. I was just passing through on my way to a marketing conference in Burlington. Marketing? Jake asked. I'm a coordinator for a tech firm in Boston, she said, her accent carrying a polish that seemed at odds with the job title. Nothing exciting. Data analysis, consumer trends. Jake nodded, though her explanation felt rehearsed. Well, Millbrook's only got one place to stay, Miller's Inn on Main Street. Mrs. Miller will take good care of you. That's very kind, she said, and for a moment her professional demeanor slipped, revealing genuine gratitude and perhaps vulnerability. I don't want to be a burden. It's no trouble, Jake said, surprised to find he meant it. That's how things work in Millbrook. We look out for each other. 500 miles away in a glass skyscraper overlooking Boston Harbor, Marcus Webb paced an executive office, his suit perfectly pressed despite the late hour. What do you mean unreachable? He demanded into his phone. She's the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. She doesn't get to be unreachable. He listened, his expression darkening. A car accident, where Vermont. His fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the desk. No, don't send a company car. Let's see what she's really doing up there. The Millbrook project is too important to risk any complications. He ended the call and stared at the city lights, his reflection revealing a smile that never reached his eyes. Oh, Victoria, he murmured. What game are you playing now? The following morning, Jake opened Morrison's garage at 6:30, just as he had every weekday since buying the converted hardware store 3 years ago. The red brick building with its tin ceiling and wooden floors had become his sanctuary after Sarah died and his career imploded. Emma sat at a desk in the corner eating breakfast before the school bus arrived. Her drawings decorated the walls, cars their family, always including the floating figure of her mother and the Vermont landscape. Dad, can we check on the car crash lady today? Emma asked, milk mustache decorating her upper lip. Her name is Vicky, Jake corrected gently, and she's staying at Mrs. Miller's Inn. Sheriff Dawson entered, stomping snow from his boots. Morning, Morrisons. Got a problem with the cruiser's electrical system again. The one I fixed last month. Jake wiped his hands on a rag. Same one. County keeps pushing back the budget for a new one. Dawson accepted coffee from the ancient pot. Heard about that tech company yet? Jake frowned. What tech company? Some big outfit from Boston looking at property outside town. Rumor is they want to build one of those data center things. Mayor's all excited about the jobs it might bring. Jake's stomach tightened. Boston. Tech company. The coincidences were piling up uncomfortably. Any name to this company? He asked, keeping his voice casual. TechFlow, something tech companies all sound the same to me, Dawson said, oblivious to how Jake had stiffened. Anyway, how soon can you look at the cruiser? As Dawson left, Emma approached her backpack slung over one shoulder. Dad, you look worried. Jake managed a smile. Just thinking about Sheriff Dawson's electrical problem. Bus will be here soon. Got everything? She nodded, but her perceptive eyes, so like Sarah's, lingered on his face. Is it about Mom? She asked quietly. You always look like that when you think about her. Jake knelt to Emma's level. Not exactly, sweetie. Just remembering some things from before we moved here. From when you were an engineer, Mom said you were the smartest engineer in the whole world. Jake swallowed hard. Your mom exaggerated. Go on now. Bus is coming. After Emma left, Jake leaned against his workbench. TechFlow Industries, the company that had destroyed his career with false accusations of corporate espionage. the company whose legal pressure had added untold stress to Sarah's final months of cancer treatment. And now they were coming to Millbrook. Victoria Chen sat in her elegantly appointed office on the 32nd floor of TechFlow Industries headquarters staring at the environmental impact report for the Millbrook data center project. The windows offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor, but she barely noticed the scenery anymore. The board expects your final approval by Friday, her assistant said, placing more documents on the crowded desk. Victoria nodded without looking up. At 32, she was the youngest CEO in the company's history thrust into leadership following Richard Blackstone's sudden death 2 years earlier. Her mentor had built TechFlow from a startup into a technology powerhouse, but his legacy had grown increasingly complicated. The Millbrook location is ideal, continued the assistant. Tax incentives, reliable power grid, minimal regulatory hurdles. And the town itself, Victoria asked. The people? The assistant hesitated. Small, rural, economically depressed since the paper mill closed. They'll welcome the jobs. Victoria wasn't so sure. I want to see it myself before making a final decision. Marcus Webb has concerns about delaying the timeline, the assistant said carefully. I'm sure he does. Victoria replied, her tone making it clear the discussion was over. Schedule a site visit, low profile. I want to see Millbrook as it really is. After the assistant left, Victoria unlocked her drawer and removed a file labeled Legacy Issues. Inside were documents she'd discovered in Richard's private office, evidence of corporate practices that had made her blood run cold. Patent theft, employee intimidation, systematic destruction of whistleblowers' reputations. She'd spent 2 years quietly cleaning house, making restitution where possible. The list of victims was long, but one name appeared repeatedly, Morrison J., Senior Engineer Battery Systems. Victoria closed the file. Perhaps it was time to see this Millbrook, Vermont for herself. After all, what were the chances she'd encounter this J. Morrison in a town of 30,000 people? The phone rang. Ms. Chen, Mr. Webb is insisting on seeing you regarding the Millbrook timeline. Victoria sighed, straightening her posture. Send him in. Marcus Webb entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting his way. At 55, TechFlow's legal counsel had survived 3 CEOs. His silver hair and tailored suits projected authority, while his reputation for ruthless efficiency ensured that few challenged him. Victoria, he said, using her first name, despite her repeated request for formality, the board is concerned about these delays with Millbrook. The board appointed me to make these decisions, she reminded him coolly, and I don't make 8-figure investments without personally assessing the situation. The situation is clear, Marcus countered, sitting without being invited. Millbrook needs economic revitalization. We need a Northeast data center. Why complicate things? Victoria met his gaze steadily. Because communities are more than data points, Marcus. And I've found that Richard's approach to expansion often left collateral damage. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, wariness, perhaps even fear. They both knew she'd been digging through Richard's files. Richard built this company by making tough decisions, he said carefully. And now I'm running it, Victoria replied. My site visit is scheduled for next week. Marcus stood, his smile not reaching his eyes. Of course, I'm sure you'll find Millbrook enlightening. After he left, Victoria returned to the file, tracing a finger over Morrison's name. Whatever Richard had done to this engineer, she was determined to set it right. The bell above the garage door jingled mid-afternoon. Jake looked up from Sheriff Dawson's cruiser to find Vicki Miller standing in the entrance. She wore jeans and a borrowed sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Despite the casual clothes, she carried herself with subtle authority. Hope I'm not interrupting, she said with a smile that transformed her professional demeanor into something warmer. Not at all, Jake replied, surprised by how pleased he was to see her. How's the head? About 8 stitches and a mild concussion. But apparently I have a thick skull. She approached his workbench, examining the tools with surprising familiarity. Mrs. Miller said you're the best mechanic in 3 counties. I thought I'd see about getting a rental car. Already called Rutland for you, Jake said. They can have something here by tomorrow. Surprise flickered across her face. That's incredibly thoughtful. She reached into her bag and produced Jake's red scarf, now carefully laundered and folded with military precision. I wanted to return this. It meant something to you, didn't it? The question was asked softly, without prying. Her brown eyes held genuine concern. My wife made it, he said simply, not trusting himself to say more. His fingers trembled slightly as he accepted the scarf. Vicky nodded, her eyes softening. She had beautiful hands, she observed, studying the intricate pattern. This took months to finish. Jake looked up sharply. The comment was too specific, too knowledgeable. You know something about knitting? Vicky's hands stilled, and for a moment her expression flickered. My grandmother taught me, she said, but the answer came just a beat too slow. I haven't done it in years, too busy with work. She gestured around the garage, clearly eager to change the subject. This is a beautiful space. How long have you been in business? Jake found himself giving her a tour. Vicky asked intelligent questions about overhead costs and seasonal fluctuations, displaying business acumen that seemed too sophisticated for a marketing coordinator. When she suggested improvements that would increase efficiency by 30%, Jake began to wonder exactly what kind of marketing she had been doing in Boston. Your daughter's artwork, Vicky asked, pausing by the wall covered in Emma's colorful drawings. Yeah, Emma's 8 going on 30, Jake said proudly. Too smart for her own good sometimes. Vicky studied a drawing of 3 stick figures, a tall one labeled Daddy, a small one labeled Me, and a floating one with wings labeled Mommy in Heaven. She lost her mother, Vicky asked softly. Jake nodded, the familiar ache returning. 3 years ago, cancer. We moved here afterward for a fresh start. I'm so sorry, Vicky said, and the genuine compassion in her voice made Jake look at her more closely. What about you, he asked. Family, Vicky turned away, her expression neutral again. None to speak of. Parents died when I was young. Grandmother raised me until she passed during my senior year of college. It's been just me since then. The simple statement held years of loneliness. Sounds like a hard way to live, Jake said. Vicky looked at him with surprise. Most people think independence is admirable, the ability to rely only on yourself. Independence is one thing, Jake replied. Isolation is something else entirely. People aren't meant to go through life alone. Something vulnerable flickered in Vicky's eyes before her professional mask returned. Perhaps, but we adapt to what life gives us, don't we? Before Jake could respond, Emma burst through the door, her backpack bouncing. Dad, I got an A on my science project. Jake scooped her up in a hug. That's my girl, I knew you would. Emma noticed Vicky and extended her hand with the seriousness of a miniature adult. Hello, I'm Emma Morrison. Are you the lady from the car crash? Vicky shook Emma's hand with equal seriousness. I am. My name is Vicky Miller. Your dad helped save me. Emma beamed. Dad fixes everything. Cars and people and toasters and everything. Are you staying for dinner? Emma asked hopefully. Mrs. Henderson brought us a casserole. There's plenty. Jake started to protest, but Vicky spoke first. I wouldn't want to impose. You wouldn't be, Emma insisted, and then I could show you my rock collection. Jake recognized the determined set of Emma's jaw, another trait inherited from Sarah. We'd be happy to have you if you'd like to join us, he said, surprised by how much he meant it. Vicky hesitated, and for a brief moment, Jake glimpsed something like longing in her eyes. That would be lovely, she said finally. As they walked to Jake's truck, Emma chattering between them, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Vicky Miller was not who she claimed to be. The technical terms she'd whispered, her knowledge of knitting, her sophisticated business insights, the way she carried herself like someone accustomed to authority. And now, with TechFlow Industries looking at Millbrook for expansion, the coincidences were too numerous to ignore. As she climbed into his truck, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing an expensive watch that would cost more than 6 months of garage profits. Definitely not standard equipment for a marketing coordinator. Who was she really? And what was she doing in Millbrook? The small dinner at Jake's modest 2-bedroom craftsman house had stretched well past Emma's usual bedtime. Somehow, Vicky's presence had transformed their routine evening into something special. Even Mrs. Henderson's ordinary casserole seemed elevated when served on their mismatched plates, with Vicky sitting across from Jake at the kitchen table. Emma's endless questions about Boston Vicky's job and whether she'd ever seen a real whale in Boston Harbor had finally been interrupted by a yawn that she couldn't suppress. Time for bed, kiddo, Jake said, rising to clear the plates. School tomorrow. But I was going to show Vicky my rock collection, Emma protested, though her drooping eyelids betrayed her exhaustion. Vicky leaned closer to Emma with a conspiratorial smile. How about this? I'm stuck in Millbrook until my rental car arrives tomorrow afternoon. Maybe I could come back to the garage after school. You could show me then. Emma brightened instantly. Promise? I promise, Vicky said with a solemnity that Jake found touching. She was treating Emma's rock collection with the same seriousness she might give to a corporate acquisition. After Emma reluctantly went upstairs to brush her teeth, Jake and Vicky settled on the front porch with coffee. The unexpected October snow had stopped, leaving the world hushed and crystalline under a clear night sky. Stars glittered overhead with a clarity only possible far from city lights. You're good with her, Jake said, breaking the comfortable silence. Most adults don't take 8-year-olds so seriously. Vicky cupped her coffee mug with both hands as if drawing warmth from it. Children know when they're being patronized. Emma's clearly bright. She deserves real conversation. She gets it from her mother, Jake said softly. Sarah was a high school science teacher. Always said the secret was treating students like they were already the scientists they could become. The mention of Sarah hung between them, and Jake was surprised to find it didn't carry the usual pain. Somehow sharing this small piece of her with Vicky felt right. What happened? Vicky asked gently. With Sarah, I mean, if you don't mind my asking. Jake looked out at the snow-covered yard, his breath making clouds in the cold air. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. By the time they caught it, there weren't many options. She fought hard for a year, but he trailed off the memories of hospital rooms and increasingly desperate treatments still raw. I'm so sorry, Vicky said, and unlike the hollow sympathy Jake had grown accustomed to, her words carried genuine weight. That must have been incredibly difficult for both of you. We had just moved from Boston, Jake continued, unsure why he was sharing so much with a woman he'd just met. I was dealing with professional issues. The stress didn't help her condition. Professional issues. Jake hesitated. Corporate politics. It doesn't matter now. Vicky seemed to sense his reluctance and changed the subject. Your home is lovely, very different from city living. It needs work, Jake admitted, glancing at the porch railing that needed replacing and the shutters that required painting. But it's ours, no mortgage at least. We bought it outright with what was left of Sarah's life insurance after the medical bills. Emma's voice called from inside, asking for her bedtime story, and Jake stood reluctantly. Sorry, duty calls. Of course. Vicky rose too, gathering her coat. Thank you for dinner. It's been a long time since I had a home-cooked meal with actual conversation. Even if half that conversation was about Minecraft and rock classifications, Jake asked with a smile. Especially then. Vicky's answering smile transformed her face, softening the businesslike edges into something that made Jake's heart skip unexpectedly. Most of my meals involve spreadsheets and quarterly projections. Jake walked her to the rental car Mrs. Miller had arranged until the one from Rutland arrived. As Vicky settled into the driver's seat, her sleeve pulled back again, revealing that expensive watch. Once again, Jake was struck by the contradiction between her claimed profession and the details that didn't quite fit. You'll be okay driving back to the inn, he asked. Roads are still icy. I'll be careful, she promised. See you tomorrow. I did make a promise about a rock collection. We'll be there, Jake said, surprised by his own anticipation of seeing her again. As he watched her taillights disappear down the street, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Vicky Miller was about to complicate his carefully reconstructed life in ways he couldn't begin to predict. The following morning brought clear skies and temperatures just warm enough to start melting the unseasonable snow. Jake opened the garage at his usual time, mind still lingering on the previous evening's conversation. There had been a moment sitting on the porch with Vicky when he'd felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, a simple connection with another adult that wasn't clouded by pity or the careful distance people maintained around widowers. Sheriff Dawson's cruiser pulled up outside, interrupting Jake's thoughts. The electrical problem had been fixed, but Dawson rarely passed the garage without stopping for coffee and town gossip. Morrison, he called, striding through the door and heading straight for the coffee pot. Heard you had dinner with the crash victim last night. Jake felt his neck warm slightly. In Millbrook, privacy was a theoretical concept at best. Emma invited her. She's stuck here until her rental car arrives. Dawson nodded knowingly. Mrs. Miller says she's quite something. Polite, but asks a lot of questions about the town. She's just being friendly, Jake said more defensively than he'd intended. Maybe so, Dawson replied, sipping his coffee. Just interesting timing with that tech company looking at land outside town. Mayor's meeting with some representatives next week. Jake's hands stilled on the engine he was reassembling. Did they say which company? TechFlow Industries, big outfit from Boston, worth billions apparently. Dawson shrugged. Could bring a couple hundred jobs if they build their data thing here. Jake's stomach tightened. Hearing the name confirmed made the threat real in a way rumors hadn't. What kind of jobs? Security maintenance technical staff. Not all high-paying tech jobs, but better than nothing with the paper mill gone. Dawson studied Jake's expression. You know something about them. Jake carefully kept his face neutral. Heard the name when I was in Boston. Big company. Aggressive. Well, the town could use the boost. Property values might even go up, not that you'd sell this place. Jake nodded non-committally, mind racing with implications. If TechFlow was seriously considering Millbrook and Vicky appeared with her too specific technical knowledge and expensive watch, the coincidences were mounting beyond probability. After Dawson left, Jake pulled out his phone and did something he had avoided for 3 years. He searched for TechFlow Industries CEO. The results loaded slowly on Millbrook's mediocre cell service, but when they appeared, Jake nearly dropped the phone. Staring back at him was a professional headshot of the woman he knew as Vicky Miller. Except here she was identified as Victoria Chen, 32, the youngest CEO in TechFlow's history, who had taken over following the sudden death of founder Richard Blackstone. Jake's mind reeled. The CEO of TechFlow, the very company that had destroyed his career and contributed to Sarah's deteriorating health through months of legal stress, was the same woman he'd pulled from a wrecked car. The same woman who'd sat at his kitchen table, charmed his daughter, and made him feel something he thought long dead. The question was, why the deception? Was her presence in Millbrook truly coincidental or something more calculated? And what would she do if she discovered who he really was? Jay Morrison, the whistleblower, who had nearly brought a lawsuit that could have damaged TechFlow's reputation permanently. Jake put down his phone, a cold feeling settling in his chest. One thing was certain, he needed to be far more careful around Victoria Chen than he had been with Vicky Miller. Victoria woke early in her room at Miller's Inn, the unfamiliar quiet of a small town jarring after years of Boston's constant hum. She'd slept better than she had in months, unburdened temporarily from the weight of corporate responsibility. Being Vicky Miller for a few days was proving to be an unexpected relief. No board meetings, no crisis management, no Marcus Webb hovering with veiled threats about shareholder expectations. Just simple conversations with real people who saw her as a person, not a position. Dinner at Jake Morrison's home had affected her more than she cared to admit. The comfortable lived-in feel of the house with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in Emma's artwork. The easy affection between father and daughter. The way Jake spoke about his late wife with love rather than bitterness despite his obvious loss. It was all so different from her sterile penthouse apartment where she spent more time reviewing contracts than actually living. And then there was Jake himself, perceptive, quietly intelligent, with hands that spoke of honest work and eyes that seemed to see more than she intended to reveal. The moment on the porch when he'd mentioned professional issues in Boston had made her pulse quicken. Had he connected her to TechFlow already? Was his silence on the matter politeness or strategy? Victoria, dressed in the casual clothes Mrs. Miller had lent her, mentally preparing for her dual role today. This morning, she needed to review the Millbrook site plans her assistant had sent, maintaining her CEO responsibilities remotely. This afternoon, she'd be Vicky again, visiting Jake's garage to see Emma's rock collection as promised. The contradiction wasn't lost on her. She was simultaneously scouting Millbrook for a project that would irrevocably change the town while forming connections with the very people whose lives would be disrupted. Her phone buzzed with Marcus Webb's name on the screen. Victoria sighed, then answered with her professional voice. "This is Victoria Chen." "Victoria," Marcus's smooth voice came through artificial concern, barely masking his impatience. "How are you feeling after your accident?" "I'm fine, thank you. Minor injuries only." "Glad to hear it. I've been looking at your calendar. You've canceled the Singapore call and the quarterly review. The board is concerned." Victoria moved to the window, looking out at Millbrook's Main Street, where shopkeepers were clearing snow from sidewalks. "The board will survive without me for a few days. I'm conducting the Millbrook site assessment personally. Ah, yes, Millbrook, Marcus said, his tone shifting to something harder. Small town charm at its finest. Economically depressed, minimal environmental resistance, desperate for jobs. Ideal for our purposes. The coldness in his voice made Victoria flinch. Those are people you are talking about, Marcus, not data points. People who will benefit greatly from TechFlow's investment, he countered smoothly. I fail to see the problem. Unless you're developing second thoughts about the expansion strategy. The implied threat wasn't subtle. Victoria had been pushing back against the board's aggressive expansion plans since discovering the ethical compromises in Richard's files. Marcus had made it clear her position wasn't as secure as she might like to believe. I'm doing my due diligence, Victoria replied evenly. The environmental impact report had inconsistencies I want to verify personally. Of course, Marcus said, clearly not believing her. While you're there, you might want to look into local opposition. We've heard rumors of potential resistance to development. Victoria's thoughts immediately went to Jake, though she couldn't say why. I'll keep that in mind. Good. We'd hate for anything to delay the project timeline. The board is expecting your final recommendation by next week. After the call ended, Victoria sat heavily on the bed, her professional mask slipping now that she was alone. The weight of her position settled back on her shoulders like a physical burden. TechFlow employed thousands of people who depended on her leadership, yet the company's legacy of ethical shortcuts and aggressive tactics against competitors was something she was still working to change. The Millbrook project represented everything complex about her role: economic opportunity for a struggling town balanced against environmental concerns and the inevitable disruption of community character. And now personal connections that complicated her objectivity even further. Victoria reached for the file her assistant had sent, forcing herself to review the technical specifications with her CEO mindset. But images of Jake's garage, Emma's eager face, and that moment of connection on the porch kept intruding, making objectivity increasingly difficult to maintain. So, mid-afternoon found Jake elbow-deep in the engine of Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick, trying to diagnose an intermittent stalling problem that had resisted his attempts at repair for 2 days. His mind wasn't fully on the task, however, still processing the revelation that Vicky Miller was actually Victoria Chen, CEO of TechFlow Industries. The bell above the door jingled, and Jake looked up to see Vicky Victoria entering the garage. She wore the same borrowed jeans and sweater as yesterday, her hair in a casual ponytail, looking nothing like the corporate headshot he'd seen online. If he hadn't known better, he'd never have connected this approachable woman with the powerful executive who ran a multi-billion-dollar technology company. You look busy, she said, observing the disassembled parts spread across his workbench. Jake wiped his hands on a rag, buying time to compose himself. Now that he knew her identity, every interaction felt like walking through a minefield. Mrs. Henderson's car has a ghost in the machine. Stalls at random intervals, but never when I'm watching. Victoria approached the workbench, studying the components with that same surprising familiarity she'd shown before. Fuel pump or electrical system? That's the question, Jake said, watching her carefully. I've replaced the fuel pump already, but the problem persists. Victoria picked up the old fuel pump, turning it over in her hands with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. Did you check the ground connections on the ECU? Sometimes corrosion can cause intermittent power loss that manifests as stalling. Jake stared at her. This wasn't basic car knowledge. This was specific diagnostic expertise that came from serious mechanical experience. That's actually a good suggestion. I was focusing on the fuel system. She set down the part, seeming to realize she'd revealed more technical knowledge than a marketing coordinator should possess. My college boyfriend was into cars. She said, the explanation coming a beat too late. I picked up a few things. Must have been quite a boyfriend, Jake said, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. Victoria met his gaze steadily, something unreadable in her expression. We all have our past lives. The charged moment was interrupted by Emma bursting through the door, backpack bouncing as she ran toward Victoria. You came back, she exclaimed. I brought my whole rock collection. Dad helped me carry it from the bus stop. Victoria's entire demeanor changed, softening as she knelt to Emma's level. I promised, didn't I? I can't wait to see what you've collected. Jake watched the interaction with mixed emotions. The CEO of TechFlow was in his garage somehow, forming a genuine connection with his daughter while hiding her true identity. The rational part of him screamed caution, but seeing Victoria's unguarded smile as Emma unpacked her collection of stones onto a workbench made it difficult to reconcile the woman before him with the faceless corporate entity that had once destroyed his life. For the next hour, Jake worked on Mrs. Henderson's Buick, while half listening to Emma's detailed explanations of each rock in her collection. Victoria listened with seemingly genuine interest, asking questions that delighted Emma with their specificity. "How did you know to ask about metamorphic classifications?" Emma asked at one point, impressed by Victoria's knowledge. "I took geology in college," Victoria replied, and Jake wondered if this too was part of her fabricated background or a real glimpse of the woman behind the CEO title. When Emma went to use the bathroom, Victoria approached Jake, lowering her voice. "You've raised an incredible daughter. She's remarkably knowledgeable for her age." Sarah started the rock collection with her, Jake said, testing the Buick's electrical connections. "I've just kept it going." Victoria nodded, then hesitated before asking, "Would it be imposing to ask about dinner again tonight? My rental car arrived, but I'm still stuck in Millbrook until tomorrow. Mrs. Miller's cooking is lovely, but eating alone in a B&B gets old fast." Jake finished for her. He knew he should keep his distance, maintain boundaries with this woman who represented everything that had gone wrong in his previous life. Yet he found himself saying, "We'd be happy to have you. Emma would be disappointed if you didn't come back." "Just Emma?" Victoria asked, a hint of vulnerability breaking through her composed exterior. Before Jake could respond, Mrs. Henderson arrived to check on her car, and the moment passed. But the question lingered between them, charged with implications neither was ready to address. The second dinner at Jake's house felt both familiar and strange, knowing what he now knew about his guest. Emma dominated the conversation, excited about her upcoming science project and asking Victoria endless questions about Boston. "Have you ever been to the Museum of Science?" Emma asked between bites of spaghetti. "Dad promised to take me someday." "Many times," Victoria replied. "They have an electrical demonstration that makes your hair stand on end. I think you'd love it." "Can we go, Dad?" Emma turned to Jake with hopeful eyes. "Someday, kiddo. It's a long drive for a day trip." "You could stay overnight," Victoria suggested, then looked embarrassed at her presumption. "I mean, Boston has many affordable hotels." Jake nodded non-committally, acutely aware of the complex reality that Victoria didn't know he knew. In her mind, she was still Vicky Miller, marketing coordinator, making casual conversation. In his, she was the CEO of the company that had systematically destroyed his professional reputation. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Victoria her room, particularly the star chart on her ceiling that Jake had painstakingly painted to match the actual night sky. "Your dad did this," Victoria asked, genuine amazement in her voice, as she stared up at the constellations. "Mom started it when she got sick," Emma explained matter-of-factly. "She said it was so she could always watch over me. Dad finished it after she went to heaven." Jake, standing in the doorway, felt the familiar ache at Emma's words. Sarah had indeed started the project during her final months, mapping out the stars but growing too weak to complete the painting. He'd finished it the week after her funeral, working through sleepless nights when grief made rest impossible. Victoria's eyes met his over Emma's head, and the understanding in them made his chest tighten. For a moment, CEO and whistleblower disappeared, leaving just two people recognizing pain in each other. Later, after Emma was asleep, they again found themselves on the porch with coffee. The night was clear and cold, the stars above mirroring the painted ones on Emma's ceiling. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly, "for dinner, for including me. It means more than you know." Jake studied her in the dim porch light, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation, but finding only genuine gratitude. "Emma likes having you around. She misses female influence." "And you, Victoria asked the question, hanging between them like frost in the air. Jake chose his words carefully. "It's been a long time since I had a conversation with an adult that didn't involve car parts or parent-teacher conferences." Victoria smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I understand isolation better than most people might guess. Hard to imagine someone in marketing feeling isolated in Boston." Jake said, the deliberate probe making him feel slightly ashamed even as he did it. Victoria hesitated, and Jake could almost see her weighing her next words. "My job isn't always what it appears to be." Few jobs are, Jake replied, giving her an opening to come clean. She seemed about to say more when her phone rang, shattering the moment. Victoria glanced at the screen, and her entire demeanor changed, shoulders straightening, jaw tightening. "I need to take this," she said, her voice already shifting to something more authoritative. "Excuse me." She stepped off the porch and walked toward the driveway, but in the quiet night air, fragments of her conversation still reached Jake. "The environmental assessment is incomplete. No, I won't sign off without proper documentation. The board doesn't have authority to override regulatory compliance, Marcus. Q3 projections are irrelevant to this discussion. We will not repeat Bakersville." Jake froze at the mention of Bakersville, a small town in western Massachusetts where TechFlow had built a manufacturing facility 5 years ago, only to abandon it when groundwater contamination became a public relations nightmare. It had been one of the issues Jake had tried to raise concerns about before his termination. Victoria returned to the porch, her expression troubled, but quickly masked when she saw Jake watching her. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Just work," she said vaguely. "I should probably head back to the inn. Early morning tomorrow." Jake walked her to her rental car. The comfortable atmosphere from earlier evaporated. As Victoria opened the car door, she paused. "Jake, she began, then stopped herself. "Thank you again for dinner." He nodded, giving her another chance to reveal her true identity, but she simply got into the car and drove away. Jake stood in the driveway long after her taillights disappeared, conflicted emotions warring within him. Part of him wanted to believe Victoria Chen was different from the corporate machine that had crushed him, that her concern for environmental assessments and regulatory compliance indicated a change in TechFlow's approach. But experience had taught him harsh lessons about corporate ethics, and trusting the CEO of TechFlow felt dangerously naive. He needed to know more about Victoria, about TechFlow's plans for Millbrook, and about whether the company had truly changed since his whistleblowing days. The next morning, a light drizzle replaced the melting snow, turning Millbrook's streets into a mess of slush and mud. Jake opened the garage early, determined to finally solve Mrs. Henderson's Buick problem. Taking Victoria's suggestion, he methodically checked every ground connection in the electrical system. On the third junction, he found it corrosion on a critical ground wire connection exactly where she had suggested he look. The discovery only deepened the mystery of Victoria Chen. How did the CEO of a technology company have such specific knowledge of automotive electrical systems? Jake was cleaning the connection when he heard the distinctive sound of expensive tires on wet pavement. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up outside the garage, looking as out of place in Millbrook as a penguin in the desert. The driver's door opened, and Jake's heart sank as a familiar figure emerged. Marcus Webb, TechFlow's legal counsel, the man who had orchestrated Jake's professional destruction 3 years earlier. He looked exactly as Jake remembered, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the cold eyes of a predator, assessing potential prey. Jake ducked behind the Buick's raised hood, mind racing. Webb had been the architect of the legal campaign against him, fabricating evidence, threatening witnesses, destroying Jake's credibility with ruthless efficiency. If Webb recognized him, any hope of maintaining a low profile in Millbrook would vanish. From his position, Jake could see Webb surveying the town square with obvious distaste before entering Mrs. Miller's inn across the street. He was clearly looking for Victoria, which raised another alarming question. Did Webb know about Jake's connection to their CEO? Was that why he was here? Jake's phone chimed with a text message from Victoria. "Something's come up. Need to postpone rock classification lesson with Emma. We'll explain later." The timing couldn't be coincidental. Webb's arrival had clearly disrupted whatever plans Victoria had made. Jake texted back a simple acknowledgement, mind still processing the implications of Webb's presence in Millbrook. 2 hours later, the black SUV departed, with Webb in the passenger seat and Victoria driving. Their expressions, visible briefly as they passed the garage, told different stories. Webb looked smugly satisfied, while Victoria's face was set in the careful neutrality of someone containing strong emotions. They were heading toward the old paper mill property outside town, the most likely location for TechFlow's proposed data center. Jake felt a cold certainty that decisions about Millbrook's future were being made without any input from the people who actually lived there. The day passed slowly with no further message from Victoria. Jake found himself checking his phone more often than he cared to admit, wondering what Webb's arrival meant for her, for TechFlow's plans, and for the fragile connection that had been forming between them. Emma came to the garage after school, clearly disappointed that Victoria wasn't there as promised. "Is Vicky coming later?" she asked, arranging her rock collection on Jake's desk. "She had a work emergency," Jake explained, hating the flash of disappointment on Emma's face. She texted to apologize. "Grown-ups always have emergencies," Emma said with the resignation of a child who had learned about life's disappointments too early. "How about we catalog those new rocks ourselves?" Jake suggested, trying to salvage her enthusiasm. "We can use the microscope I fixed last month." They were examining a piece of quartz when Sheriff Dawson's cruiser pulled up outside. The sheriff entered, looking unusually serious. "Morrison," he said with a nod. "Emma, how about you go say hello to Mrs. Peterson next door? I hear she just baked cookies." Emma looked between the adults, sensing tension. "Is something wrong?" "Just boring grown-up talk," Dawson assured her. "Go on now." Once Emma was out of earshot, Dawson turned to Jake. "Thought you should know Mayor called an emergency town council meeting tonight. TechFlow representatives are presenting their proposal for a data center at the old mill site. They're moving faster than anyone expected." Jake's hands tightened on the workbench. "How fast?" "Construction could begin next month if permits are expedited. Mayor's pushing hard, says it's the economic opportunity Millbrook's been waiting for." "And the environmental impact?" Jake asked, thinking of Victoria's phone conversation. Dawson shrugged. "They're promising state-of-the-art environmental protections, minimal water usage, sustainable energy. Sounds good on paper." Like all TechFlow promises, Jake thought bitterly. "When's the meeting?" 7 tonight, Town Hall. Public's invited to observe, but questions are being limited." Dawson studied Jake's face. "You seem more concerned than I'd expect from someone who just fixes cars." Jake forced his expression to neutralize. "Just thinking about what it means for the town. Change isn't always improvement." After Dawson left, Jake called Mrs. Miller to watch Emma, then closed the garage early. He needed to attend that meeting, needed to see Victoria in her true element as TechFlow's CEO. Only then could he decide how to proceed, whether to reveal his own identity or continue the mutual deception they had established. The town hall was packed when Jake arrived, every chair filled with Millbrook residents curious about the corporate giant interested in their small community. Jake slipped into the back, scanning the room for Victoria. He spotted her at the front table, transformed from the casual Vicky he'd come to know into the formidable CEO her position demanded. She wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Jake's monthly income. Her hair pulled back in a sleek knot, her posture projecting authority and confidence. Beside her sat Marcus Webb, looking smugly satisfied as the mayor fawned over the TechFlow representatives. The sight of them together, Victoria and the man who had orchestrated Jake's destruction, sent a cold surge of betrayal through him, despite his rational understanding that Victoria likely knew nothing of Jake's history with the company. The mayor called the meeting to order, his enthusiasm for the project barely contained. "Tonight we have the extraordinary opportunity to hear directly from TechFlow Industries about their proposed data center for Millbrook. This project represents a significant investment in our community and the potential for hundreds of jobs." Victoria rose to speak, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and press conferences. "Thank you, Mayor Reynolds, and thank you to the people of Millbrook for allowing us to present our proposal. TechFlow is committed to sustainable development that benefits both our company and the communities where we operate." She launched into a presentation about the data center, its technical specifications, employment opportunities, and environmental safeguards. As Jake watched, he could detect subtle tensions between her presentation and Webb's occasional interjections. Victoria emphasized environmental protections and community benefits. Webb focused on economic impact and tax incentives. During the question period, local business owners asked about construction contracts and hiring practices. Victoria promised preference for local businesses where possible, while Webb smoothly mentioned the specialized nature of much of the work, implying outside contractors would handle major components. It was when elderly Mrs. Peterson, Emma's cookie-baking neighbor, stood to ask about water usage that the dynamic shifted noticeably. "The mill used to dump chemicals in the river," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice wavering but determined. "My husband died of cancer like many who work there. How can we trust your company won't do the same?" Webb started to deliver a practiced response about corporate responsibility, but Victoria interrupted him. "That's a fair question," she said, surprising everyone, including Webb. "Trust isn't given, it's earned. TechFlow made mistakes in the past under previous leadership mistakes I'm committed to not repeating. I propose an independent environmental oversight committee comprised of Millbrook residents with full access to our operations and authority to report concerns directly to state regulators." Webb's face tightened with barely contained anger, but Victoria continued. "Additionally, TechFlow will establish a healthcare fund for Millbrook residents focused on monitoring long-term health outcomes related to industrial exposure." The room buzzed with surprised approval. These weren't standard corporate promises, they represented real concessions and accountability that most companies would avoid at all costs. As the meeting concluded, Jake watched Victoria engaged in conversation with concerned residents, answering questions with unexpected directness, while Webb hovered nearby, clearly displeased with her approach. Jake was about to leave when Victoria looked up and saw him at the back of the room. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by something like panic. In that moment, Jake knew she understood that her dual identity had been exposed. Their eyes held across the crowded room, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The game was up for both of them. Victoria Chen, CEO of TechFlow, now knew that Jake Morrison, small-town mechanic, had been watching her corporate performance while holding knowledge of her deception. What neither yet realized was that each held only half the truth. Victoria didn't know that Jake was Jay Morrison, the whistleblower who had nearly brought TechFlow to its knees 3 years earlier. And Jake didn't know that Victoria had been searching for him, hoping to make amends for the company's past misdeeds. As Victoria excused herself from the conversation and began moving toward him, Jake made a split-second decision. He needed time to process this new reality to determine whether Victoria's apparent commitment to corporate responsibility was genuine or simply better-crafted deception than her predecessor had employed. He slipped out the side door into the rainy night, leaving Victoria calling Jake behind him, her professional mask momentarily forgotten in a moment of genuine connection. The first phase of their relationship had ended with mutual recognition of deception. What would come next would depend on whether either could trust the other enough to reveal the complete truth and whether the past that connected them would ultimately unite or destroy them. Rain pelted against the windshield of Jake's truck as he drove home from the town hall meeting, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The image of Victoria Chen in her tailored suit standing beside Marcus Webb had shaken him more than he cared to admit. For a moment, it had been like traveling back in time to the TechFlow boardroom, where his career had been systematically dismantled 3 years earlier. Mrs. Miller was reading to Emma when Jake arrived home, the two of them curled up on the couch with a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. Emma's eyes brightened when she saw him, then quickly clouded with concern. "Dad, you're all wet. Did you forget your umbrella again?" Jake forced a smile, hanging his dripping jacket by the door. "Just a little rain, kiddo. Nothing serious." Mrs. Miller gathered her things, giving Jake a searching look. "You missed quite a meeting. Everyone's talking about TechFlow's proposal." "I caught the end of it," Jake said non-committally. "Thanks for watching, Emma." After Mrs. Miller left, Jake went through the bedtime routine on autopilot, his mind still replaying the moment Victoria had spotted him across the crowded town hall. The panic in her eyes had been real, the fear of discovery, of having her carefully constructed identity exposed. But there had been something else there too, something that looked strangely like relief. Emma's voice pulled him back to the present. "Dad, is Vicky coming back tomorrow?" Jake hesitated. How to explain the complicated truth to an 8-year-old? "I'm not sure, Em. She's pretty busy with work." "She promised to finish classifying my metamorphic rocks," Emma said with the solemn certainty of a child who believed adults always kept their promises. "We'll see," Jake replied, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. "Try to get some sleep now." He was halfway down the hallway when Emma called after him. "Dad, Vicky seems sad sometimes like you, but she smiles more when she's here with us." Jake paused, struck by his daughter's perceptiveness. "What makes you say that?" "I can just tell," Emma said, yawning, "the way she looks at our pictures on the refrigerator, like she wishes she had some too." Long after Emma was asleep, Jake sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, researching Victoria Chen. There wasn't much personal information available, just the standard corporate biography, a few interviews about TechFlow's market position, and photos from industry events. In every image, she wore the same polished professional mask he'd seen at the town hall. There was nothing about her upbringing, her education, or her life for TechFlow. It was as if Victoria Chen existed only as a corporate entity, not as a person with history and connections. His phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk, Victoria." Jake stared at the message, conflicting emotions warring within him. Part of him wanted to ignore it to protect the new life he'd built for himself and Emma. But another part, a part he thought long buried, wanted answers. He replied simply, "Tomorrow, garage, 9 a.m." Sleep proved elusive that night, his dreams filled with boardrooms and accusations, with Sarah's face pale against hospital sheets, and with Victoria's eyes across a crowded town hall, recognizing him at last. Victoria sat in her room at Miller's Inn Rain, tapping against the windows as she removed the tailored suit jacket that felt like armor after days in borrowed sweaters and jeans. The town hall meeting had gone according to plan until she'd spotted Jake in the back of the room, watching her with an expression that spoke volumes. He knew. He'd seen through her Vicky Miller persona, witnessed her transformation into CEO mode. The question was, how much did he know about TechFlow, and why had he fled when she tried to approach him? Victoria had expected to feel panic at being discovered, but what surprised her was the undercurrent of relief. The dual identity had become increasingly difficult to maintain, especially as her feelings for Jake and Emma deepened beyond what she'd anticipated. Her phone rang, displaying Marcus Webb's number. Victoria briefly considered ignoring it, then steeled herself and answered. "Marcus?" "Victoria." His voice carried the false warmth that always preceded his most manipulative moves. "Interesting performance tonight. The Environmental Oversight Committee was a particularly creative touch." "It wasn't a performance," Victoria replied coolly. TechFlow's reputation in small communities is problematic. Building trust is essential for sustainable operations. "Trust," Marcus repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept. "The board is concerned about your unilateral promises. The healthcare fund alone could cost millions if properly implemented, which is a fraction of what we'll earn from the data center over its operational lifetime," Victoria countered. "This isn't just ethical business practice, it's risk management." "Speaking of risk," Marcus's voice hardened, "you've been spending considerable time with a local mechanic and his daughter. Some might see that as unusual behavior for a CEO conducting site assessment." Victoria's blood ran cold. Webb had been watching her. "I had a car accident. He helped me. Basic human connection isn't suspicious, Marcus. Connections can be complicated, especially when they involve certain individuals." A significant pause. "Get some rest, Victoria. Tomorrow will be a busy day. The board is eager for your final recommendation on the Millbrook project." After Webb hung up, Victoria sat motionless, mind racing. The implied threat in his words was clear. Webb knew something about Jake, something he thought could be used as leverage. She pulled up her laptop, entering a search query she'd been avoiding. Jake Morrison, mechanic, Boston. The results were sparse, but one link caught her attention, a 3-year-old article from a small tech industry blog. TechFlow engineer terminated after corporate espionage allegations. The article was brief, mentioning only that a senior engineer, Jay Morrison, had been fired for allegedly attempting to share proprietary battery management technology with competitors. The accusations had been vehemently denied by Morrison, but TechFlow's legal team had presented compelling evidence. Victoria's hands trembled as connections began forming in her mind. The technical terms Jake had displayed when working on cars, his professional issues in Boston, his reaction to TechFlow's interest in Millbrook. She opened the secure folder on her laptop, the one containing Richard Blackstone's hidden files that she'd been systematically working through for 2 years. Searching for Morrison, she found a subfolder she hadn't yet examined. Inside were dozens of documents detailing the case against Jake, including internal memos from Marcus Webb, outlining the strategy to discredit a troublesome whistleblower. The truth hit her like a physical blow. Jake Morrison wasn't just any mechanic who'd helped her after an accident. He was Jay Morrison, the whistleblower, who had tried to expose ethical violations at TechFlow and had his life destroyed as a result. The very person she'd been hoping to find and make amends to as part of her mission to right the wrongs of her predecessor. And now, without knowing his true identity, she'd brought the very company that had ruined him right to his doorstep. Victoria picked up her phone and sent a text to Jake's number, knowing a conversation was inevitable. His terse reply, tomorrow, garage, 9 a.m., told her all she needed to know about his current state of mind. The rain continued through the night as Victoria prepared for what would undoubtedly be the most difficult conversation of her professional life. The morning dawned gray and misty, the rain reduced to a fine drizzle that softened the edges of Millbrook's buildings. Jake opened the garage early, sending Emma off to school with a neighbor's child, wanting to ensure their confrontation wouldn't have an audience. At precisely 9 a.m., a black luxury sedan pulled up outside, not the rental car Victoria had been using, but clearly a corporate vehicle. She emerged wearing what Jake assumed was her standard CEO attire, a charcoal pantsuit, crisp white blouse, and heels that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment before Sarah got sick. The persona of Vicky Miller had been completely shed, replaced by Victoria Chen, CEO of TechFlow Industries. Yet as she approached the garage entrance, Jake noticed a hesitation in her step that betrayed uncertainty beneath the corporate armor. "You can stop pretending now," Jake said, as she entered, not looking up from the engine he was working on. "I know exactly who you are." Victoria closed the door behind her, shutting out the sounds of the quiet town street. "And I know who you are too, Jake. Or should I say Jay Morrison, former senior engineer battery management systems at TechFlow." Jake's hands stilled on the wrench he was holding. He hadn't expected her to have made that connection so quickly. "So Marcus Webb did recognize me at the town hall." "No," Victoria said, moving closer but maintaining a careful distance. "Webb doesn't know yet. I figured it out myself last night after you left." Jake finally looked up, studying her face for any sign of deception. "Why the charade, Victoria? Was it amusing to play small-town tourist while scouting locations to expand your corporate empire?" "It wasn't like that," she said, and for a moment he caught a glimpse of the woman who had sat on his porch swing and helped Emma with her rock collection. "The accident was real. My rental car hit black ice. Everything after that meeting you, Emma, staying in Millbrook, it was all coincidence. Quite a coincidence that you happened to crash your car in the exact town where the whistleblower you destroyed had relocated," Jake said bitterly. Victoria shook her head. "I had no idea you were here. The Millbrook Data Center project was initiated 6 months ago, based purely on technical criteria, power grid stability, tax incentives, available land. Your presence here was completely unknown to me until last night. And yet you knew technical details about my battery management algorithm. The first words you spoke when I pulled you from the car," Jake countered. "Coefficient errors, those were your exact words." A flash of confusion crossed Victoria's face. "I don't remember saying that. I was barely conscious." Jake set down his wrench, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Then how do you explain knowing exactly how to diagnose Mrs. Henderson's car problem yesterday? The ground connection issue that most mechanics would have missed." Victoria hesitated. "I've always had an interest in engineering. I read technical journals. I picked things up." "Try again," Jake said flatly. "Marketing coordinators don't typically diagnose complex automotive electrical problems. And CEOs don't typically have hands-on mechanical knowledge unless they started in engineering." Victoria's professional composure faltered. She looked around the garage as if seeking an escape route, then finally met Jake's gaze directly. "You're right. I wasn't always in marketing or management. I have a master's degree in electrical engineering from MIT. I started at TechFlow in R&D, working on battery efficiency algorithms for electric vehicles." She took a deep breath. "In fact, I was part of the team that reviewed your original designs before you raised concerns about safety protocols." Jake stared at her, the pieces slowly falling into place. "You were on the battery team. I don't remember you. Junior member just out of grad school. We never worked directly together," Victoria explained. "By the time I had enough authority to understand what had happened with your case, you were long gone and Richard Blackstone was spinning a very different story about corporate espionage." "Blackstone," Jake spat the name. "He buried evidence of thermal runaway risks in the prototype batteries. When I tried to document the safety concerns suddenly, I was accused of trying to steal proprietary technology." Victoria nodded, her expression pained. "I know. I found the files after Blackstone died. The real test data, the manipulated evidence against you, the strategy memos from legal." It was all in a hidden server that was only accessible after his death triggered certain security protocols. Jake felt the ground shifting beneath him. For 3 years, he'd carried the weight of injustice without vindication, believing the entire corporate structure of TechFlow had conspired against him. The idea that the current CEO might actually know the truth, might even believe him, was almost too much to process. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, wariness replacing some of his anger. Victoria moved to the workbench, running her fingers lightly over the tools laid out in precise order. "When I became CEO, I discovered that Richard had left behind a company built on brilliance, but also on ethical shortcuts. I've spent 2 years trying to change TechFlow's culture while making amends for past misconduct, including what happened to you." "Amends?" Jake laughed humorlessly. "You think you can make amends for destroying someone's career, contributing to their wife's deteriorating health, forcing them to start over in a town where fixing lawnmowers is considered a professional achievement?" Victoria flinched as if he'd struck her. "No, I don't think amends are possible for that level of harm, but acknowledgement, restitution, and change might be a start." Before Jake could respond, the garage door opened and Emma burst in her face alight with excitement. "Dad, Mrs. Peterson let me out early because it's library day and—" She stopped abruptly when she saw Victoria in her corporate attire. "Vicky, you look different." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Victoria looked from Emma to Jake, clearly uncertain how to proceed. "Emma," Jake said carefully, "why don't you go next door to Mrs. Peterson's for a little while? Vicky and I need to talk about some grown-up things." Emma's perceptive gaze moved between them, sensing the undercurrents. "Are you mad at each other?" "No, sweetheart," Victoria said, her voice softening immediately. "We're just sorting out some complicated things. I promise we'll explain later." Emma seemed unconvinced but nodded slowly. "Okay, but don't forget you still need to help me with my metamorphic rocks." After Emma had gone, an uncomfortable silence filled the garage. The easy rapport they had developed over shared meals and late-night conversations on the porch seemed a distant memory. "She's an extraordinary child," Victoria said finally. "She is," Jake agreed, "which is why I'm not going to let TechFlow destroy her home the way it destroyed her mother's chance of recovery." Victoria's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Jake turned away, the memory still painful after 3 years. "Sarah was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer right before I found the safety issues with the battery designs. The stress of the legal battle, the character assassination, watching our savings disappear into lawyers' fees while she needed experimental treatments." He swallowed hard. "The doctors said stress accelerates cancer progression. You do the math." The color drained from Victoria's face. "I didn't know. The files mentioned you were married, but not that your wife was ill." "Of course they didn't," Jake said bitterly. "That would have made TechFlow's legal team look like monsters instead of corporate defenders." Victoria moved to the garage window, looking out at Millbrook's quiet main street. For a long moment she was silent, seemingly wrestling with a decision. "I'm pulling the data center project," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. Jake stared at her. "What?" "I'm canceling the Millbrook project," Victoria repeated, turning to face him. "TechFlow won't build here. We'll find another location." Just like that, Jake was incredulous. "A multi-million-dollar project scrapped because of one conversation?" "No." Victoria shook her head. "Because it's the right thing to do. TechFlow has already taken too much from you and from Emma. I won't be responsible for disrupting the home you've built here." Jake studied her, looking for signs of manipulation or corporate strategy, but found only resolute determination in her eyes. "The board won't allow it," he said after a moment. "Marcus Webb certainly won't." A ghost of a smile touched Victoria's lips. "I'm still the CEO despite Marcus's attempts to undermine me. I have my ways of handling the board." The bell above the door jingled, and Sheriff Dawson entered, his expression unusually serious. "Morrison, Miss Chen," he nodded to each of them. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Victoria replied smoothly, slipping back into her CEO persona. "Mr. Morrison was just giving me some local perspective on our proposed project." Dawson's gaze moved between them, clearly sensing the tension. "Well, thought you both should know there's been some unusual activity at the old paper mill site. Surveyors, environmental testing crews, all with TechFlow logos." Victoria frowned. "That's not possible. I haven't authorized any site work yet." "Well, somebody did," Dawson replied. They've got permits signed by your Marcus Webb as corporate representative. Mayor's over there now, pleased as punch to see things moving so quickly. Jake watched Victoria's expression shift from confusion to anger, her hands clenching at her sides. Marcus has overstepped his authority, she said, her voice cold. Those permits are invalid without my signature. Not according to the papers they showed me, Dawson said. All signed and official looking. Construction equipment scheduled to arrive next week. Victoria pulled out her phone. Excuse me, I need to make a call. She stepped outside, her back rigid with contained fury. Dawson raised an eyebrow at Jake. Care to explain why the CEO of TechFlow is having a private meeting in your garage and why she looks ready to commit murder? Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's complicated, Dawson. It usually is when corporate types are involved, the sheriff replied. Just remember, this town's been through enough with the mill closure. People are desperate for those jobs, even if the company isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Through the window, Jake could see Victoria pacing on the sidewalk, her phone pressed to her ear or gesturing emphatically. Whatever Webb had done, he'd clearly pushed her past professional composure. I've got my eye on this situation, Dawson said as he headed for the door. Just wanted you to know what was happening. After Dawson left, Jake returned to the Buick he'd been working on, trying to focus on the simple, straightforward task of mechanical repair rather than the complicated ethical and emotional tangle that Victoria Chen represented. She returned several minutes later, her face flushed with anger, but her voice controlled. Marcus went around me. He got a board member to authorize preliminary site work while I was unavailable after the accident. Convenient timing, Jake observed. Very, Victoria agreed grimly. He's been building a case for weeks that I'm not committed to TechFlow's expansion strategy. This was his move to force my hand. So what happens now? Jake asked. You said you were canceling the project, but clearly Webb has other ideas. Victoria's expression hardened with determination. Now I go to the mill site and shut down those survey teams personally. Then I call an emergency board meeting and remind them exactly who is CEO of this company. She turned to leave, then hesitated at the door. Jake, I meant what I said. TechFlow won't build in Millbrook. Whatever it takes, I'll make this right. As she walked to her car, Jake found himself believing her not because of her corporate authority, but because he'd seen the real person behind the CEO facade over the past few days. The woman who had connected with Emma over rock classifications and who had looked at his small-town life with something like longing rather than pity. He watched her car pull away, headed toward the mill site, wondering if Victoria Chen's determination would be enough against the corporate machine that had so efficiently destroyed his own career. The old paper mill property sat on the outskirts of Millbrook, its abandoned buildings slowly being reclaimed by nature after 5 years of neglect. As Victoria's car crunched up the gravel access road, she could see multiple vehicles with TechFlow logos parked near the main structure, along with surveying equipment and environmental testing stations already set up. Mayor Reynolds stood talking animatedly with a man in a TechFlow jacket gesturing toward the river that ran along the property's edge. Both turned as Victoria parked and emerged from her car. Ms. Chen, Reynolds called, hurrying over. What a pleasant surprise. We were just discussing water usage projections with your advance team. There is no advance team, Mayor Reynolds, Victoria said firmly. These activities have not been authorized by me or by TechFlow's executive leadership. The TechFlow employee, a mid-level project manager, Victoria recognized from the Boston office, approached with visible confusion. So, Chen, we have signed authorization from Mr. Webb and the board. The documentation is all in order. Show me, Victoria demanded, extending her hand. The project manager retrieved a folder from his vehicle and handed it to her. Victoria flipped through the pages, her anger mounting as she saw what Webb had done. The authorization had indeed been signed by a board member, Richard's old friend Gerald Harrington, using an obscure bylaw that allowed temporary executive authority in the absence of the CEO. When did you receive these orders? Victoria asked the project manager. 3 days ago, he replied, right after your accident was reported. Mr. Webb said you were incapacitated and that the project needed to maintain momentum. Victoria handed the folder back, her decision made. Everyone pack up. This site assessment is suspended effective immediately. But Ms. Chen, the mayor, protested. The permits are already filed. The town council voted last night to approve the preliminary work. I understand, Mayor, but there's been a misunderstanding within our company, Victoria explained diplomatically. I need to sort this out before any further work proceeds. As the TechFlow employees began reluctantly gathering their equipment, Victoria stepped away to make a call. Gerald Harrington answered on the second ring. Victoria, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Gerald, you authorized site work in Millbrook without my knowledge or consent, Victoria said without preamble. Using a bylaw meant for emergencies when the CEO is genuinely incapacitated. Marcus presented a compelling case that you were unreachable and that time-sensitive work needed to proceed, Harrington replied smoothly. The board felt it was in TechFlow's best interest. The board doesn't get to decide when I'm incapacitated based on Marcus Webb's say-so, Victoria countered. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. no exceptions. That's rather short notice. 9 a.m. Gerald, and I suggest you review Richard's special projects server before then, particularly the files related to Jay Morrison and environmental compliance in Bakersville. A long pause followed. What are you implying, Victoria? I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that I have access to every file Richard Blackstone kept, including the ones he thought were hidden. If the board wants to challenge my authority as CEO, they should be prepared for complete transparency about TechFlow's past business practices. After ending the call, Victoria leaned against her car, the adrenaline of confrontation leaving her shaky. She just threatened the board with exposure of information that could potentially destroy the company's reputation and stock value. It was a nuclear option, one she'd hoped never to employ. As the TechFlow vehicles began departing, Mayor Reynolds approached again, his earlier enthusiasm replaced with concern. Ms. Chen, this project means everything to Millbrook. We've been struggling since the mill closed. I understand, Victoria said, but I need you to trust that I'm looking out for Millbrook's long-term interests. Sometimes the jobs that seem most attractive come with hidden costs. Like the cancer cluster from the mill's chemical dumping, a voice said from behind them. Victoria turned to see Jake walking toward them, having apparently followed her to the site. Mr. Morrison, the mayor greeted him with obvious surprise. I didn't expect to see you taking an interest in economic development. I take an interest in my town not being exploited by corporations that put profit above safety, Jake replied evenly, his eyes on Victoria. Something I have some experience with. The mayor looked between them, sensing an undercurrent he didn't understand. Well, I should go update the council about this delay. Mrs. Chen, I hope you'll reconsider what this means for our community. After Reynolds departed, Victoria and Jake stood in awkward silence amid the abandoned mill buildings. The spring drizzle had stopped, leaving the air fresh with the scent of wet earth and new growth. You actually did it, Jake said finally. You shut it down. Temporarily, Victoria cautioned. Webb won't give up so easily. Neither will the board. But you're willing to fight them, Jake observed. Why is it just guilt over what happened, Tom? Victoria looked away, gathering her thoughts. When I first found Richard's hidden files, I was horrified. The company I dedicated my career to had systematically buried safety concerns, intimidated whistleblowers, falsified environmental impact data. I considered resigning, going public with it all. Why didn't you? Jake asked. Because I realized that walking away would change nothing. The same culture would continue under new leadership. The only way to truly fix TechFlow was from the inside. She met his gaze directly. I made a promise to myself that I would transform the company, make restitution where possible, and ensure those ethical failures never happened again. Jake studied her, seeing beyond the corporate facade to the engineer who had once shared his commitment to safety and integrity. That's a noble goal, but corporations resist change, especially when it affects the bottom line. I'm discovering that, Victoria said wryly. Marcus Webb has been my biggest obstacle. He was Richard's right hand, the architect of most of the questionable legal strategies, including what happened to you. I remember, Jake said grimly. He personally delivered the termination papers and NDA that prevented me from warning anyone about the battery issues. Victoria hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering her since discovering Jake's identity. Did the safety concerns ever get addressed after you were forced out? Jake's expression darkened. There was a recall 18 months later after 3 vehicles experienced thermal events. TechFlow called it a precautionary measure due to new testing protocols. No mention that an engineer had flagged the exact issue years earlier. I'm so sorry, Victoria said quietly, for all of it. Jake shook his head. You weren't responsible. You were just part of the system. That doesn't absolve me, Victoria insisted. I could have asked more questions, looked more closely at the test data. Instead, I accepted the official story and focused on my career advancement. They began walking along the perimeter of the property, the conversation flowing more naturally away from the watchful eyes of others. The old mill contaminated the groundwater for decades, Jake said, gesturing toward the river. People here still don't trust what comes out of their taps, even though the EPA declared it safe after remediation. And you think a TechFlow data center would create similar problems? Jake considered this. Maybe not the same chemicals, but the same pattern of corporation making promises about jobs and economic benefits while downplaying risks and environmental impact. What if it could be different? Victoria asked. What if there were genuine safeguards, transparent operations, community oversight with real authority? Is that even possible with shareholders demanding maximum returns? Victoria smiled slightly. That's the battle I've been fighting for 2 years, convincing the board that ethical business is sustainable business. Some days I make progress. Other days, Marcus Webb goes around you and starts site work without authorization. Jake finished for her. They had reached the river's edge where the afternoon sun was finally breaking through the clouds, creating scattered diamonds of light on the water surface. Emma loves this spot, Jake said almost to himself. We come here to skip stones on summer evenings. She says it's where the fairies live. Victoria watched his face soften at the mention of his daughter. She's lucky to have you. The way you've created stability for her after losing her mother? It's remarkable. It's just what parents do. So, Jake shrugged. You adjust, you survive, you find new patterns. Not all parents, Victoria said quietly. My father left when I was 4. My mother worked 3 jobs and I barely saw her. When she got sick my junior year of high school, there was no one to adjust for me. Jake glanced at her, surprised by the personal revelation. I'm sorry. What happened? Cancer like your Sarah. I finished high school while taking care of her, then got scholarships to college. She died during my sophomore year. Victoria picked up a flat stone and attempted to skip it across the water, but it sank immediately. I've never been good at this. Jake selected a stone and demonstrated the proper wrist flick, sending it bouncing 5 times across the surface. It's all in the technique, not the strength. Emma could show you she's better than I am. A comfortable silence fell between them, the antagonism of their earlier confrontation gradually giving way to the connection that had been building before their mutual deceptions were exposed. What happens now? Jake asked finally. With TechFlow with the project, Victoria sighed, her CEO burden settling back on her shoulders. Tomorrow I face the board. I'll make the case that Millbrook isn't the right location, that the environmental and community considerations make it untenable. And if they overrule you, they'll try, Victoria acknowledged, but I have leverage they don't know about. Richard's files contain enough problematic material to keep lawyers busy for years. You'd risk your position as CEO to, Jake asked, genuinely curious. Victoria thought about it, looking out across the river. 2 weeks ago, I would have said no. My identity was completely wrapped up in being TechFlow's CEO, in fixing Richard's mistakes from the inside. But now, Jake prompted when she trailed off. Now I've seen what life could be like outside the corporate bubble. Dinners with actual conversation. A community where people know each other's names. A little girl who collects rocks and believes in fairies by the river. She looked at him directly. It's made me question what success really means. Before Jake could respond, his phone rang, Mrs. Peterson calling about Emma. He listened for a moment, his expression shifting to concern. I'll be right there, he said, ending the call. Emma fell at school. Nothing serious, just a scraped knee, but she's asking for me. Well, go, Victoria said immediately. She needs you. Jake hesitated, seemingly torn between his daughter's needs and the unfinished conversation with Victoria. This discussion isn't over. There's still a lot we haven't resolved. I know, Victoria agreed, but Emma comes first, always. Something in her tone, the genuine understanding of his priorities, made Jake look at her with new appreciation. Come by the house tonight if you want. Emma would like to see you before you head back to Boston. Are you sure? Victoria asked, surprised by the invitation after everything that had happened. Jake nodded slowly. I'm still processing all of this. But Emma shouldn't have to lose someone else she's grown attached to without at least saying goodbye. As Jake walked back toward town to get his truck, Victoria remained by the river contemplating the unexpected turn her life had taken. She had come to Millbrook to assess a data center location and instead had found the whistleblower she'd been searching for, a child who saw through corporate facades to the lonely person beneath, and a glimpse of a life measured in human connections rather than quarterly profits. Tomorrow she would face the TechFlow board with the most important decision of her career. But tonight she had promised to help a little girl classify metamorphic rocks. Somehow in this moment, the latter felt like the more significant commitment. Wow. The TechFlow Industries conference room on the 32nd floor overlooked Boston Harbor, the morning sun glinting off the water and highlighting the sleek glass and steel aesthetic that characterized the company's headquarters. The boardroom table, a single piece of polished mahogany that had cost more than most cars, was surrounded by 12 executive chairs, 10 of which were currently occupied by board members, watching Victoria Chen with expressions ranging from concern to open hostility. Marcus Webb sat at the far end, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression one of professional regret, masking obvious satisfaction. Beside him, Gerald Harrington drummed his fingers nervously on the table. "Let me be sure I understand," said Elaine Winters, the board's most senior member. "You are unilaterally canceling the Millbrook Data Center project after months of planning and considerable investment in site assessment and community outreach." "I am recommending we explore alternative locations," Victoria corrected, her voice calm despite the tension in the room. "The Millbrook site presents specific challenges that weren't adequately addressed in the initial environmental assessment. Challenges that our experts have already evaluated and deemed manageable," Webb interjected smoothly. "The permits are in process. The local government is supportive, and the economic incentives are significant." Victoria met his gaze directly. "Those permits were obtained without my authorization using a bylaw meant for emergency situations when the CEO is genuinely incapacitated." "You were unreachable for 3 days following your accident," Webb countered. "Time-sensitive decisions needed to be made. I was in Millbrook conducting a thorough site assessment as I informed my executive assistant," Victoria replied. "Hardly incapacitated or unreachable. Yet you failed to respond to critical communications," Gerald Harrington noted. "And there are concerns about your objectivity regarding this particular project." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Meaning, Umbe?" Webb slid a folder across the table. "Security footage from Millbrook Town Hall. You having dinner with a local mechanic and his daughter. The same mechanic who later attended the public presentation and with whom you had a private meeting yesterday morning." Victoria opened the folder to find photographs clearly taken with a telephoto lens of her at Jake's house on his porch at his garage. Her stomach tightened with anger at the invasion of privacy, but she kept her expression neutral. "I had a car accident. Mr. Morrison assisted me and subsequently helped arrange temporary transportation. I expressed my gratitude by accepting a dinner invitation." Victoria closed the folder and pushed it back toward Webb. "I wasn't aware that common courtesy warranted surveillance." "The concern isn't the social interaction itself," Elaine Winters said carefully. "It's the apparent influence it's had on your professional judgment regarding the Millbrook project." "My judgment is based on thorough environmental and community impact assessment," Victoria insisted, "not personal connections." Webb leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Then perhaps you're unaware that your new friend is actually Jay Morrison, the former TechFlow engineer terminated 3 years ago for attempting to share proprietary battery technology with competitors." A murmur ran through the board members. Victoria had expected this revelation, but still felt a surge of protective anger on Jake's behalf. "I'm well aware of Mr. Morrison's identity," she said evenly. "What I'm also aware of, which apparently the board is not, is that the allegations against him were fabricated." Webb's confident expression faltered it slightly. "That's absurd. The evidence was conclusive." "The evidence was manufactured," Victoria countered, opening her laptop. "By you, Marcus, on Richard Blackstone's orders." She turned the screen to face the board, displaying internal memos from Webb to Blackstone, outlining the strategy to discredit a problematic engineer who had raised safety concerns about battery designs. The board members leaned forward, expressions shifting from skepticism to alarm as they scanned the documents. Where did you get these? Webb demanded, his composed facade cracking. From Richard's private server, Victoria replied. The one he thought no one would ever access, containing detailed records of every ethical shortcut, safety violation, and legal manipulation TechFlow engaged in under his leadership. Gerald Harrington's face had gone pale. Victoria, these are confidential internal documents. Exposing them could what Gerald force accountability require us to acknowledge past misconduct? Isn't that precisely what a responsible corporation should do? Victoria stood, commanding the room's attention. For 2 years, I've been quietly addressing Richard's legacy, making restitution to affected parties, implementing ethical safeguards, changing corporate culture from within. I had hoped to do it without disrupting TechFlow's operations or stock value. But if forced to choose between protecting the company's reputation and doing what's right, I will choose integrity every time. You're threatening the board, Webb said incredulously. I'm offering clarity, Victoria corrected. The Millbrook project will not proceed under my leadership, not because of my personal connection to Jay Morrison, but because it represents exactly the kind of corporate behavior that nearly destroyed lives 3 years ago, and that continues to haunt our reputation in communities like Bakersville. She closed her laptop, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. TechFlow has a choice to make. We can continue the path of prioritizing profit over people, of manipulating communities and discarding employees who raise inconvenient truths, or we can become the company we claim to be in our mission statement: innovative, ethical, and committed to positive impact. Elaine Winters studied Victoria thoughtfully. And if the board chooses to continue with the Millbrook project despite your objections, Victoria gathered her materials, her mind made up. Then you'll need to find a new CEO, one who hasn't seen Richard's files and doesn't know where all the bodies are buried. As she walked toward the door, Webb called after her. This is career suicide, Victoria. You're throwing away everything you've worked for. Victoria paused, thinking of Jake's garage, of Emma's rock collection, of the simple dinner table where she'd felt more at home than in her luxury penthouse apartment. No, Marcus, she said quietly. I'm finally figuring out what actually matters. She stepped out of the boardroom, closing the door on the stunned silence behind her. For the first time since becoming CEO, Victoria felt truly free, not just of Richard Blackstone's toxic legacy, but of her own limiting beliefs about success and worth. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. Emma's school science fair tonight. She's presenting her rock collection. Said to tell you metamorphic samples still need classification. 6 p.m. if you're back from Boston. Victoria smiled, typing a reply as she walked through TechFlow's sleek corporate headquarters for what might be the last time. Wouldn't miss it. We have a promise to keep. The elementary school gymnasium had been transformed into a sea of trifold poster boards and handmade volcanoes for the annual science fair. Parents and siblings crowded the aisles, admiring projects on everything from plant growth to simple circuits, their voices creating a constant hum of background noise. Jake stood beside Emma's display, helping her arrange her rock collection on a blue cloth while she practiced her presentation. Her excitement was contagious, but Jake found his attention repeatedly drawn to the gymnasium entrance. It was already 6:15, and Victoria hadn't arrived. Do you think she forgot? Emma asked, adjusting her carefully labeled metamorphic samples. She promised to help me finish the classification. I'm sure she's just running late, Jake assured her, though privately he wondered if the board meeting in Boston had ended differently than Victoria anticipated. Traffic from Boston can be unpredictable. Emma nodded solemnly. Mom always said that promises matter most when they're hard to keep. The simple wisdom, clearly a phrase Sarah had repeated, often caught Jake off guard. He knelt beside Emma, struck once again by how much of her mother lived on in her perspective. Your mom was right about that. About what? A familiar voice asked. They both looked up to see Victoria standing there, slightly breathless, as if she'd rushed in. She'd changed from her corporate attire into something more casual: jeans and a simple blouse, though Jake noted she still wore the expensive watch that had first made him suspicious. Vicky, Emma exclaimed, then hesitated, glancing at her father. Or should I call you something else now? Victoria smiled, kneeling to Emma's level. Victoria is my full name, but I like how you say Vicky. Friends use nicknames, right? Emma beamed, the momentary uncertainty forgotten. You made it. I saved the metamorphic samples for you. Dad helped me label most of them, but we weren't sure about these 3. As Emma launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her rock categorization system, Jake studied Victoria. There was something different about her, a lightness that hadn't been there before, as if some invisible burden had been lifted. When she caught his questioning gaze, she gave a small nod that he somehow understood meant they would talk later. For the next hour, Victoria was completely present with Emma, helping her refine her classifications and offering suggestions for her presentation. Several other parents cast curious glances their way, clearly wondering about the elegantly poised woman who seemed so at home with the town mechanic and his daughter. When Mrs. Wallace, Emma's science teacher, came by to evaluate the project, Victoria stepped back, allowing Emma to present her work entirely on her own. Jake watched with pride as his daughter confidently explained the differences between igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic rocks, demonstrating knowledge well beyond her grade level. "Excellent work, Emma," Mrs. Wallace said, making notes on her clipboard. "Your classification system is very sophisticated. Did you come up with this organization method yourself?" Emma glanced toward Victoria with a smile. "Vicky helped me. She knows a lot about rocks." Mrs. Wallace looked at Victoria with interest. "Are you a geologist, Ms. Chen?" Victoria supplied. "And no, I just took some courses in college." Emma did all the real work. After Mrs. Wallace moved on to the next project, Jake leaned closer to Victoria. "Geology courses, huh? That part was true. Double major in electrical engineering and earth sciences," Victoria admitted quietly. "I've always been fascinated by how the physical world works, both natural and manufactured." "You're full of surprises," Jake said, finding himself genuinely impressed rather than suspicious for the first time. The moment was interrupted when Mayor Reynolds approached, his expression shifting from friendly to confused when he spotted Victoria in casual clothes helping Emma arrange her rock display. "Ms. Chen," he greeted her with obvious surprise. "I didn't expect to see you at our little science fair." "Emma invited me," Victoria replied simply, as if the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation regularly attended elementary school events in small Vermont towns. "I see." Reynolds glanced between Victoria and Jake, clearly trying to piece together the relationship. "Have you had a chance to reconsider the project delays? The town council is quite concerned about the mixed signals from TechFlow." Victoria's expression remained pleasant, but took on a more professional edge. "Perhaps we could discuss this another time, Mayor. Tonight is about celebrating the children's scientific achievements." Of course," Reynolds agreed, though his disappointed expression suggested he'd hoped to lobby for the project. "We should set up a meeting soon, though. The economic opportunity." "Dad," Emma called, waving Jake over to where the judges were announcing category winners. "Excuse us," Jake said, grateful for the interruption. He and Victoria moved away, joining the crowd of parents gathering around the judges' table. "Fourth grade physical sciences, first place," the principal announced. "Emma Morrison for her comprehensive rock classification project." Emma's face lit up with surprise and joy as she hurried forward to accept a blue ribbon. Jake felt a rush of fatherly pride, clapping enthusiastically. Beside him, Victoria applauded with equal enthusiasm, her smile as genuine as any parent's. "She's remarkable," Victoria said softly, watching Emma accept congratulations from her classmates. "So much like her mother, I imagine." "Yes and no," Jake replied, his chest tight with complicated emotions. "She has Sarah's curiosity and determination, but there's something that's uniquely Emma too, a way of connecting with people that neither Sarah nor I ever had." As if to prove his point, Emma was already showing her ribbon to another girl who had looked disappointed at not winning, generously sharing her moment of triumph. The award ceremony concluded, and families began gathering projects and heading home. Emma carefully packed her rock collection into the specialized case Jake had built for her, chattering excitedly about adding her ribbon to the collection on her bedroom wall. "Can Vicky come over to celebrate?" Emma asked, looking between the adults with hopeful eyes. "Mrs. Henderson brought us a chocolate cake yesterday. She said it was for emergencies, and I think celebrating is kind of an emergency." Jake couldn't help laughing at Emma's logic. "I think Mrs. Henderson meant different kinds of emergencies, but—" He glanced at Victoria. "You're welcome to join us if you'd like." Victoria hesitated. "I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not imposing if we invite you," Emma stated with the straightforward reasoning of an 8-year-old. "Besides, you helped me win." "Your project won because of your hard work," Victoria corrected gently. but I would love to celebrate with you." As they walked to Jake's truck, Emma between them proudly carrying her display board, several parents called congratulations. Jake noticed how naturally Victoria fit into this scene, not as TechFlow's CEO, but simply as someone who cared about Emma. The realization both comforted and unsettled him. The evening at Jake's house had an almost surreal quality. Victoria Chen sitting at his kitchen table helping Emma document her rock samples in a special notebook, while Jake served slices of Mrs. Henderson's chocolate cake. If someone had told him a week ago that the CEO of TechFlow would be in his kitchen discussing the crystalline structure of granite with his daughter, he would have thought they were delusional. After Emma finally went to bed, still buzzing with excitement from her win, Jake and Victoria moved to the front porch with coffee, a routine that had somehow established itself during her stay in Millbrook. The night was clear with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "So," Jake said, breaking the comfortable silence, "what happened at the board meeting?" Victoria cradled her mug between her hands, looking out at the quiet street. "I gave them a choice, abandon the Millbrook project or find a new CEO." Jake nearly choked on his coffee. "You did what?" "I made it clear that I wouldn't support a project that repeated TechFlow's past patterns of prioritizing profit over community welfare," Victoria said simply, as if she hadn't just risked a high-powered career many would kill for. "And I showed them enough of Richard's files to make them understand I wasn't bluffing." How did they react? Shocked initially, then calculating, trying to determine if I was serious. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Elaine Winters, the most senior board member, asked for a 24-hour recess to discuss options privately. "And what do you think they'll decide?" Victoria shrugged the gesture, surprisingly casual for someone whose professional future hung in the balance. "Logically, they should replace me. I've essentially threatened the board with exposure of potentially damaging information if they proceed against my recommendation. That's not typical CEO behavior." "Nothing about you seems typical," Jake observed, studying her profile in the dim porch light. "Most CEOs wouldn't spend their evening at an elementary school science fair or classifying rocks with an 8-year-old. "No," Victoria agreed softly. "They wouldn't." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the distant sound of crickets and the occasional passing car. Jake found himself wondering what Victoria's life in Boston was really like. If her penthouse apartment felt as empty as she'd once implied, if her days were filled entirely with the corporate maneuvering he'd witnessed at the town hall meeting. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Why did you keep coming back here to the garage to dinner? Even after you found out who I was, you still came to Emma's science fair. Why?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "At first, it was just gratitude. You pulled me from that car, used something precious to stop my bleeding. Then it was curiosity. I'd never experienced small-town life family dinners that didn't involve business discussion." She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "But after I learned who you were, I think I needed to see what TechFlow's actions had really cost. Not just in abstract terms, but in human impact." "And what did you see?" Jake asked, not entirely sure he wanted the answer. "I saw what resilience really looks like," Victoria replied, meeting his gaze directly. "A man who lost everything, career, reputation, wife, but still created a stable, loving home for his daughter. Who rebuilt a life centered on integrity and community rather than status or financial success." She looked down at her coffee. "It made me question everything about my own definition of achievement." The honesty in her voice struck Jake deeply. For 3 years, he'd carried the weight of TechFlow's betrayal, the anger at how easily his life had been dismantled by corporate interest. Victoria's words didn't erase that history, but they offered something he hadn't expected: recognition of what he'd accomplished in spite of it all. "Emma makes it worthwhile," he said simply. "Everything I do is to give her stability, to honor what Sarah and I wanted for her." "You've succeeded," Victoria assured him. "She's extraordinary, confident, compassionate, curious about the world. That doesn't happen by accident." Before Jake could respond, his phone rang. The screen showed Sheriff Dawson's number, unusual for this time of night. "Dawson," Jake answered, instantly alert. "Everything okay?" "You need to get down to the mill site," Dawson said without preamble, his voice tense. "There's been a development. Trucks arrived about an hour ago, big earth movers, construction equipment. They've already started clearing land." Jake's grip tightened on the phone. That's not possible. Victoria Ms. Chen shut down the preliminary work. Well, somebody didn't get the message, Dawson replied grimly. They've got paperwork signed by someone named Webb and a board member. Say they're on an accelerated timeline. Victoria, who could clearly hear both sides of the conversation, was already on her feet, her expression hardening into something Jake recognized from the town hall meeting, the CEO taking control. We'll be right there, Jake told Dawson, ending the call. He turned to Victoria. Webb moved faster than you expected. He's trying to create a fait accompli before the board reconvenes, Victoria said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Once the land is cleared, it becomes much harder to justify stopping the project. Can he actually do this, override the CEO? Victoria was already moving toward the door. Not legally, but he's betting that by tomorrow either I'll be removed as CEO or the damage will be done. Jake grabbed his jacket. I'll get Mrs. Miller to sit with Emma. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the mill site to find it transformed into a construction zone. Powerful floodlights illuminated the area where several large machines were already clearing trees and brush. Sheriff Dawson's cruiser was parked near the entrance, where he appeared to be having a heated discussion with a man in a TechFlow jacket. As Jake and Victoria approached, Dawson turned with visible relief. Ms. Chen, glad you're here. This gentleman insists they have proper authorization for this work. The TechFlow manager, different from the project manager Victoria had dismissed earlier, looked distinctly uncomfortable at her arrival. Ms. Chen, we have signed orders from Mr. Webb and board approval for expedited site preparation. May I see these orders? Victoria asked, her voice deceptively calm. The manager produced a folder similar to the one she'd examined earlier, but with new signatures and timestamps. Victoria flipped through it, her expression darkening. This authorization is invalid, she stated firmly. As CEO of TechFlow Industries, I am ordering all work to cease immediately. Ma'am, with all due respect, the manager replied nervously. Mr. Webb indicated you might attempt to interfere. He provided specific instructions that the work is to continue regardless under the board's emergency authorization protocol. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Call Mr. Webb right now. The manager hesitated, then stepped away to make the call. Jake could see Victoria's hands trembling slightly with suppressed fury, though her face remained composed. Can they really do this? Dawson asked quietly. Start major construction work at night without proper town notification? No, Jake answered. But by the time the legal challenges work through the system, the environmental damage will be done. The manager returned, looking even more uncomfortable. Mr. Webb would like to speak with you, he said, holding out his phone to Victoria. She took it and walked a few paces away for privacy. Jake couldn't hear the conversation, but Victoria's rigid posture and the way she occasionally gestured sharply with her free hand suggested it wasn't going well. When she returned, her expression was tightly controlled. Sheriff Dawson, I'd like to formally report that these individuals are trespassing on property for which they do not have valid work authorization. As CEO of TechFlow Industries, I am stating for the record that this operation was not approved through proper channels. Dawson straightened, clearly relieved to have clear direction. In that case, I'll have to ask all personnel to cease operations and vacate the premises until this corporate dispute is resolved. The TechFlow manager looked panicked. Sheriff, we have signed documentation, which has been invalidated by the CEO of your company, Dawson interrupted firmly. I suggest you contact your legal department while your crews pack up. If you want to dispute Ms. Chen's authority, you can do it in court tomorrow, not by bulldozing protected land tonight. As Dawson moved to inform the work crews, the manager turned to Victoria with barely concealed anger. Mr. Webb said to inform you that the board has called an emergency session for 8 a.m. tomorrow. He suggested you might want to reconsider your position before then. Tell Marcus I look forward to seeing him tomorrow, Victoria replied evenly, and that he might want to review his employment contract, particularly the clauses regarding insubordination and unauthorized use of corporate resources. After the manager stormed off, Jake studied Victoria's face in the harsh floodlights. Despite her composed exterior, he could see the toll this confrontation was taking. You okay, Sam? Oh. No, she admitted quietly. Marcus has gone further than I anticipated. He's convinced at least one more board member to support him, which makes tomorrow's vote dangerously close. What happens if you lose? Jake asked, watching as the heavy equipment began powering down around them. Victoria's gaze swept across the partially cleared land, the ancient trees already toppled to make way for TechFlow's expansion. Then Millbrook changes forever, and I find myself unemployed with an impressive resume and a permanently damaged reputation in the corporate world. The matter-of-fact way she described potentially losing everything she'd worked for struck Jake forcefully. You'd really risk all that for a town you barely know. Victoria turned to him, her expression softening slightly. Not just for the town, for the principle that corporations shouldn't be allowed to steamroll communities. For Emma's right to skip stones in a river that isn't contaminated by industrial runoff. She paused, then added more quietly, and maybe a little bit for the mechanic who used his wife's handmade scarf to save a stranger. Before Jake could respond to the unexpected admission, Dawson approached to confirm that the work crews were departing. They're not happy about it, but they're leaving. I'll have a deputy keep watch overnight to make sure they don't try to return. Thank you, Sheriff, Victoria said with genuine gratitude. I apologize for putting you in this difficult position. Dawson shrugged. Part of the job. Though I gotta say, corporate politics makes small-town disagreements look downright friendly. He glanced between Victoria and Jake with undisguised curiosity. You two have some history I should know about. It's complicated, Jake answered, not ready to explain his past with TechFlow to anyone in Millbrook, even Dawson. Isn't it always? Dawson replied philosophically. Well, I'll handle things here. You folks should get some rest. Sounds like tomorrow's going to be a battle. As they walked back to Jake's truck, Victoria's phone chimed with an incoming email. She checked it, then stopped abruptly, her face paling in the moonlight. What is it? Jake asked, instantly concerned. Marcus has escalated, she said, her voice tightly controlled as she handed him the phone. He's moved beyond trying to push through the project. Jake read the email, a formal notice from TechFlow's legal department, informing Victoria Chen that she was being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into improper personal relationships impacting business decisions and potential breaches of fiduciary duty. Attached were photos of her at Jake's house, at the garage, and at the science fair with Emma. He's trying to force you out completely. Jake said, the familiar cold anger at corporate tactics rising in his chest. Using your connection with us as the excuse. It's a common strategy, Victoria confirmed, taking back her phone. Create a narrative about emotional decisions or conflicts of interest that undermine the CEO's judgment. The board feels justified in taking action, and shareholders are reassured that the company is maintaining proper governance. The clinical way she analyzed her own professional assassination reminded Jake forcefully that Victoria Chen hadn't become CEO without understanding the ruthless nature of corporate politics. What's your next move? He asked as they reached the truck. Victoria checked her watch, the expensive timepiece that had first made Jake suspicious of her identity. It's nearly 10. The board meets at 8 tomorrow. I need to make some calls tonight, prepare my counter-arguments. You can use my home office, Jake offered, surprising himself with the instinctive desire to help. It's just a converted bedroom, nothing fancy, but it's quiet. Victoria looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Why would you help me? After everything TechFlow did to you, you have every reason to want to see the company implode. Jake considered this as he started the truck. TechFlow isn't just Marcus Webb or Richard Blackstone. It's thousands of employees who depend on those jobs. It's technology that could actually improve lives if developed ethically. He glanced at her. And now it's led by someone who seems to actually care about doing the right thing, even at personal cost. The drive back to Jake's house was quiet, both of them lost in thought about the coming confrontation. Jake found himself in the strange position of hoping that Victoria would win her battle with the TechFlow board, the same corporate entity he'd cursed for 3 years for destroying his life. Mrs. Miller was reading in the living room when they returned, Emma long since asleep. She took in their serious expressions with a raised eyebrow, but asked no questions as she gathered her things to leave. There's fresh coffee in the kitchen, she said at the door. And Jake Mayer Reynolds called. Said he wants to meet with you tomorrow about recent developments. Sounded important. After she left, Jake showed Victoria to the small room he used as a home office. It was modest, just a desk computer and bookshelves filled with technical manuals and children's stories he read to Emma. A far cry from the executive suite Victoria likely occupied in Boston. It's perfect, she said, setting down her phone. Thank you. Jake hesitated in the doorway. Do you need anything else? Coffee? Something stronger? Victoria smiled tiredly. Coffee would be great. It's going to be a long night. As Jake headed to the kitchen, he heard Victoria making her first call, her voice shifting into the authoritative CEO tone he'd witnessed at the town hall meeting. The transformation was still jarring, this dual nature of the woman who had helped Emma classify rocks and who now fought for control of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He returned with coffee to find Victoria already deep in strategy mode, her laptop open to spreadsheets and corporate documents, her phone to her ear as she paced the small room. The environmental impact assessments were deliberately minimized, she was saying to whoever was on the other end. Yes, I have documentation. Richard's files include the original testing data and the altered versions submitted to regulators. She paused, listening. I understand the potential stock implications, Elaine, but continuing down this path exposes us to much greater liability long-term. Jake set the coffee on the desk and turned to leave, not wanting to eavesdrop on corporate strategy, but Victoria caught his arm, her hand warm against his skin. She mouthed, "Thank you," while still listening to the person on the phone. For a moment, they stood connected, the mechanic whose life had been shattered by corporate greed and the CEO fighting to transform the very system that had destroyed him. The contradiction wasn't lost on Jake, nor was the strange sense that, despite everything, he trusted Victoria Chen more than he'd trusted anyone outside his family in 3 years. He nodded and slipped out, closing the door quietly behind him. In the hallway, he checked on Emma, finding her sound asleep, with her science fair ribbon clutched in one hand. The sight centered him, reminding him of what truly mattered, regardless of what happened with TechFlow or Victoria Chen. Later, as midnight approached, Jake sat at his kitchen table reviewing the town zoning regulations and that might help delay the data center project if Victoria lost her battle with the board. The legal language was dense, but his engineering background helped him identify several potential procedural requirements that TechFlow might have overlooked in their rush to break ground. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear Victoria approach until she spoke from the doorway. You're still up, she observed, her voice carrying the hoarseness of someone who'd been on calls for hours. Jake looked up, noting the exhaustion in her face despite her perfect posture. Just doing some research. How's it going? Victoria came to sit across from him, running a hand through her hair in a surprisingly human gesture. I've spoken with 5 board members individually. 3 seem to be leaning my way, 2 are firmly with Marcus, and the rest are waiting to see which way the wind blows tomorrow. That doesn't sound promising, Jake said, offering her a fresh cup of coffee. She accepted it gratefully. Corporate boards hate public conflict. If they think Marcus and I are engaged in a power struggle that might become public, they'll opt for whichever solution seems most likely to maintain stock value and avoid negative press. And that would be replacing both of us, Victoria said with a humorless laugh. Bring in an outsider with no connection to either faction, present it as new leadership for TechFlow's next growth phase, and quietly continue exactly as before. Jake studied her across the table. You've considered all the angles, I see. I've been in this world a long time, Victoria replied. The game is predictable once you understand the motivations. So what's your strategy? Victoria sipped her coffee, considering. Give them something they want more than they fear public conflict. A clear path to increased value that doesn't require ethical compromise. Is that possible? Jake asked skeptically. I believe it is, Victoria said with surprising conviction. The problem is that corporate leadership often takes shortcuts because they can't see past quarterly results. But true sustainability, environmental and ethical, creates more value long-term than exploitation ever could. The passion in her voice reminded Jake of conversations they'd had on his porch before he knew she was TechFlow's CEO, when she was just Vicky, a woman who saw the world with surprising clarity. You really believe you can change how corporations like TechFlow operate? He said, not quite a question. I have to try, Victoria replied simply. Otherwise, what's the point of having power at all? The question hung between them, philosophical yet deeply personal. Jake found himself wondering what might have happened if Victoria had been CEO when he'd raised safety concerns about the battery designs, if his life might have taken an entirely different path. What will you do if you lose tomorrow? He asked finally. Victoria set down her coffee cup, considering the question seriously. Professionally, I have enough reputation and connections to find another position, though likely not as CEO after such a public dismissal. She paused, then added more quietly, personally, I'm not sure. The past week in Millbrook has made me question a lot of assumptions about what makes a successful life. Like what? Jake prompted, genuinely curious. Like whether 80-hour work weeks in a penthouse with a view I never have time to enjoy are worth sacrificing human connection. Victoria said, her gaze meeting his directly. Like whether Emma's rock collection and classification system might actually represent more meaningful achievement than TechFlow's quarterly earnings. The candor of her response caught Jake off guard. That's not what I expected to hear from someone who climbed to CEO by age 32. I'm surprising myself lately, Victoria admitted with a small smile. Your daughter has that effect on people. She does, Jake agreed, pride warming his voice. Sarah used to say Emma could see straight through to what matters. At the mention of Sarah, a comfortable silence fell between them. Jake realized with some surprise that it no longer hurt to speak of his late wife with Victoria, that somehow her presence had become a space where memories of Sarah felt like a shared connection rather than a wall between them. I should try to get some sleep, Victoria said, finally glancing at the clock. Tomorrow will require all my focus. Jake nodded. The guest room is made up. It's not the Four Seasons, but it's perfect, Victoria interrupted with a genuine smile. Thank you, Jake, for everything. As she rose to leave, Jake found himself saying, whatever happens tomorrow with the board, you've already changed TechFlow by trying. That matters. Victoria paused in the doorway, looking back at him with an expression that made his heart skip. It does, she agreed softly. But I'm beginning to think that what happens here in Millbrook might matter more. With that enigmatic statement, she disappeared down the hallway, leaving Jake to wonder exactly what she meant and why the possibility filled him with both hope and trepidation. Morning arrived too quickly, pale sunlight filtering through the kitchen windows as Jake prepared breakfast. Emma was already dressed for school, chattering excitedly about showing her ribbon to her friends. She seemed unsurprised to find Victoria at the breakfast table, as if the CEO's presence in their home had become entirely normal. Will you be here when I get home? Emma asked Victoria around a mouthful of cereal. I want to show you my new rock identification book. Dad ordered it special after we found the weird green one by the river. Victoria exchanged a glance with Jake before answering carefully. I'm not sure, sweetheart. I have an important meeting in Boston today that might take a while. Emma's face fell slightly. But you'll come back later, tomorrow maybe. The innocent question hung in the air, carrying more weight than Emma could possibly understand. Victoria reached out to smooth a strand of Emma's hair, the gesture surprisingly maternal. I'll do my very best, she promised. And either way, I want you to know how much I've enjoyed our rock classification sessions. Jake watched the interaction with a tightness in his chest. In just a week, Victoria had become important to Emma, and his daughter had clearly become important to Victoria. Whatever happened with the TechFlow board today would affect more than just corporate policy or land development. As they prepared to leave Jake to drive Emma to school, Victoria to head to Boston for her showdown with the board, Emma suddenly ran back inside and returned with her science fair ribbon. For luck, she said, pressing it into Victoria's hand. Dad says you have a big grown-up thing today. Mom always said ribbons are lucky. Victoria's composure faltered for the first time that morning, her eyes suspiciously bright as she carefully folded the ribbon and placed it in her purse. Thank you, Emma. That means more than you know. After dropping Emma at school, Jake drove Victoria to where her corporate car waited in the Miller's Inn parking lot. The morning was bright and clear, Millbrook's Main Street just coming to life as shopkeepers opened for the day. So, Jake said as they pulled up beside the black sedan. I guess this is it. Victoria nodded, her expression already shifting toward the corporate mask she would need for the coming confrontation. The board meets at 8. By noon, TechFlow will either have a new direction or a new CEO. For what it's worth, Jake said. I hope you win. Victoria smiled at that. From you, that means everything. She hesitated, then added, whatever happens, I want you to know that meeting you and Emma has changed me. For the better. Before Jake could respond, Victoria leaned across the space between them and kissed his cheek, a gesture that was over almost before he registered it. Then she was out of the truck and walking toward her waiting car, every inch the CEO again. Jake watched her drive away, a strange mixture of emotions churning within him. Concern for her battle with the board, worry about what her potential departure would mean for Emma, and something deeper and more personal that he wasn't quite ready to name. His phone chimed with a message from Victoria. "Thank you for the coffee and the perspective. See you on the other side." As Jake drove to the garage, he realized that for the first time in 3 years, he was actually rooting for TechFlow, or at least for Victoria's vision of what the company could become. The irony wasn't lost on him, but then nothing about Victoria Chen had been what he expected from the moment he'd pulled her from that crashed Tesla. The morning passed in a blur of routine repairs and oil changes, though Jake found himself checking his phone frequently for news. Around 11, Sheriff Dawson stopped by, his expression more serious than usual. "Thought you should know," he said, declining the usual coffee. "Marcus Webb is at Town Hall with Mayor Reynolds and some fancy lawyers. They're talking about filing an injunction against Ms. Chen for interfering with the data center project." Jake's hands stilled on the carburetor he was rebuilding. "That seems premature, given that the board is meeting right now to decide the project's fate." "Maybe," Dawson agreed. "Or maybe Webb already knows how that vote is going to go. Politics, corporate or small town, is rarely straightforward." After Dawson left, Jake tried to focus on work, but his thoughts kept returning to Victoria facing the TechFlow board alone. Despite her confidence and preparation, she was essentially challenging an entrenched system that had destroyed careers far more established than hers, including his own. At precisely noon, Jake's phone rang with Victoria's number. He answered immediately, moving to the privacy of his office. "It's done," Victoria said without preamble, her voice carrying an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. "And," Jake prompted, his grip tightening on the phone. "The board voted 6-4, Victoria continued. "They've accepted my recommendation to abandon the Millbrook project and explore alternative locations with stronger environmental safeguards and community support." Relief flooded through Jake. "That's fantastic. You won." "Not entirely," Victoria said, her tone shifting to something more complex. "There was a condition attached to their approval." Jake's relief faltered. "What condition?" The pause that followed lasted just long enough to make Jake's heart sink. When Victoria finally spoke again, her voice carried a mixture of resignation and something that sounded almost like freedom. "Effective immediately, I am no longer the CEO of TechFlow Industries." "Effective immediately, I am no longer the CEO of TechFlow Industries." Victoria's words hung in the air as Jake tried to process their implications. The static of the phone connection filled the silence between them. "They fired you," he finally managed, his voice tight with disbelief. "Not exactly," Victoria replied, and he could hear the rustling of papers in the background. "It was presented as a mutual separation. The board accepted my recommendation to abandon the Millbrook project, but only if I stepped down." Jake leaned against his workbench, the familiar anger at corporate injustice rising in his chest. "That's blackmail. They forced you to sacrifice your career to save the town." "I made the choice freely," Victoria said with surprising calm. "Some things are worth more than a title, Jake." The simple statement struck him deeply. 3 years ago, his own principles had cost him everything: career, reputation, financial security. He'd made the same choice Victoria had just made, but with far more bitterness. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Victoria sighed, "I officially hand over to the interim CEO, Elaine Winters, thankfully not Marcus, and clear out my office. The press release goes out at 3. And then..." The pause before her answer carried a vulnerability that the confident CEO had rarely allowed herself to show. "I'm not sure. For the first time in 15 years, I don't have a meticulously planned next step." Jake found himself saying, "Come back to Millbrook." "What?" Victoria sounded genuinely surprised. "Emma's expecting you for dinner," Jake continued, the words coming spontaneously. "She'll want to hear about your big grown-up thing and show you that rock identification book. And after everything you've done for this town, it seems wrong for you to sit alone in a Boston penthouse tonight." Another pause, longer this time. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had softened. "I'd like that, but I need a few hours here first. Corporate transitions, even mutual ones, involve paperwork and protocols." "Of course," Jake said, feeling inexplicably relieved. "Just text me when you're heading back and I'll make sure Emma's rock collection is properly organized for inspection." Victoria's laugh, genuine and unguarded, warmed something in his chest. It's a date. I mean, she caught herself suddenly awkward. An arrangement. A plan. A plan, Jake agreed, smiling despite the gravity of her situation. Drive safely. After they hung up, Jake stood motionless in his garage office, trying to make sense of the conflicting emotions churning within him. Victoria Chen had just lost her position as CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation to protect Millbrook, to protect him and Emma in a very real sense. The magnitude of that sacrifice wasn't lost on him, nor was the strange parallel to his own whistleblowing 3 years earlier. The bell above the garage door jingled, interrupting his thoughts. Mayor Reynolds entered, his usual jovial expression replaced with poorly concealed agitation. "Morrison," he greeted Jake with forced casualness. "Got a minute?" Jake wiped his hands on a shop rag, already wary. "What can I do for you, Mayor?" Reynolds glanced around as if ensuring they were alone before continuing. "Heard you've become quite friendly with Victoria Chen." "News travels fast in small towns," Jake observed neutrally. "That it does." Reynolds cleared his throat. "Look, I'll be direct. Marcus Webb from TechFlow is still in town. Says there's been some kind of corporate reshuffling, but the data center project might still be salvageable if we act quickly." Jake's jaw tightened. "Ms. Chen just informed me that the board has officially canceled the Millbrook project." "That's one interpretation," Reynolds hedged. "Webb says the situation is fluid, that with the right local support, the project could be reinstated under new leadership." "Let me guess," Jake said coldly. "Webb wants me to use my influence with Victoria to get her to back off completely." Reynolds had the grace to look uncomfortable. "He suggested that your personal connection might be valuable in ensuring a smooth transition." The sheer audacity of Webb's manipulation nearly took Jake's breath away. "Mayor, with all due respect, Marcus Webb destroyed my engineering career 3 years ago through false accusations and character assassination. The fact that he's now trying to use me to undermine Victoria Chen tells you everything you need to know about his ethics." Reynolds blinked, clearly caught off guard by this revelation. "You were an engineer at TechFlow. I had no idea." "Few people do," Jake cut him off. "I came to Millbrook to rebuild, not to revisit that chapter of my life. But I can tell you with absolute certainty that Webb cannot be trusted, and any promises he makes about the data center will come with hidden costs." The mayor seemed genuinely conflicted, his desire for economic development warring with this new information. "The jobs, Morrison, the tax revenue. The town needs this." "What the town needs," Jake countered, "is sustainable growth that doesn't sacrifice our environmental health or community character. Not a corporate project rammed through by manipulation and backroom deals." Reynolds studied Jake with newfound curiosity. "You sound like you know more about corporate development than most mechanics should." "I know enough," Jake replied simply. "And I know Marcus Webb is in Millbrook because he lost the boardroom battle today. He's desperate and dangerous." Something in Jake's tone must have registered with the mayor, who finally nodded slowly. "I'll take that under advisement. For what it's worth, not everyone on the council was comfortable with how quickly this project was moving." After Reynolds left, Jake tried to return to work, but found himself unable to focus. Victoria's sacrifice kept replaying in his mind, along with the knowledge that Webb was still in Millbrook, still scheming. The familiar knot of anxiety that had dominated his life during the TechFlow whistleblowing had returned, unwelcome, but recognizable. His phone chimed with a message from Mrs. Miller. "Just saw Webb leaving town hall. Looked like the cat that got the cream. Whatever he's planning, it can't be good." Jake texted back a quick thanks, then called Sheriff Dawson. "Webb's still in town, apparently meeting with the council. Thought you should know." "Already aware," Dawson replied, his voice grim. "Got a call from the town clerk. Webb filed some kind of emergency petition claiming tortious interference with business relations against both TechFlow and Victoria Chen personally. Town council's reviewing it now." "What does that even mean?" Jake asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. "Legal gibberish for she cost us money by stopping the project," Dawson translated. "It's a pressure tactic. Webb's trying to scare the council into supporting him by threatening litigation that could bankrupt the town." Jake's grip tightened on his phone. "Is it working?" "Reynolds is wavering," Dawson admitted, "but a few council members are standing firm, including Mrs. Peterson, surprisingly. Said she'd rather fight in court than watch another generation die of industrial poisoning." The news should have been reassuring, but Jake's instincts were screaming that Webb wouldn't stop with legal threats. The man had orchestrated Jake's professional destruction with ruthless efficiency. He wouldn't hesitate to do the same to Victoria or anyone who stood in his way. Dawson, Jake said carefully, I think Webb might be dangerous not just legally but personally. He's just lost a major corporate battle, and from what I've seen, he doesn't handle defeat well. You suggesting I keep an eye on him? Dawson asked, his tone sharpening with professional interest. I'm suggesting Victoria Chen might need protection when she returns to Millbrook tonight, Jake clarified. Webb has a history of extreme measures when his authority is challenged. I'll swing by your place later, Dawson promised, and I'll make sure Webb knows he's being watched. After ending the call, Jake texted Victoria with a brief warning about Webb's continued presence in Millbrook and his legal maneuvers. Her response came quickly. Not surprised, Marcus never accepts defeat. Should be leaving Boston within the hour. We'll call when I'm close. Jake picked up Emma from school as usual, finding her bubbling with excitement about both her science fair ribbon and Victoria's promised return. Dad, can we make something special for dinner? She asked as they drove home. To celebrate Vicky winning her grown-up thing. Jake hesitated, unsure how to explain that Victoria had both won and lost today. That's a nice thought, Em. But Victoria's day was complicated. She did something really brave that cost her a lot. Emma considered this with the serious contemplation of a child trying to understand adult complexities. Like when you gave up your special red scarf to help her when she was bleeding. The comparison, so simple yet profound, made Jake smile despite his concerns. Something like that, yes. She chose to help others even though it was hard for her. Then we definitely need to make something special, Emma declared with absolute certainty. Mom always said brave things should be celebrated even more than easy things. Once again, Sarah's wisdom filtered through their daughter struck Jake deeply. Your mom was right. How about we make that pasta Victoria liked last time? Emma nodded enthusiastically, already planning the menu as they pulled into their driveway. Jake was so engaged with her chatter that he initially missed the sleek black car parked across the street, not Victoria's corporate sedan, but something more expensive with tinted windows and no license plate visible from this angle. His instincts prickled with warning. Emma, why don't you go next door to Mrs. Peterson's for a bit? I need to take care of something. Emma looked confused but didn't argue, accustomed to the occasional disruptions of single-parent logistics. Can I take my rock book to show her? Of course, Jake agreed, walking her to the neighbor's door and exchanging a meaningful glance with Mrs. Peterson, who immediately understood something was amiss. We'll have cookies and mineralogy, she assured him with a wink to Emma. Take your time. As Jake returned to his house, the front door opened before he reached it. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed, as always, his silver hair perfectly styled, despite the long day of corporate and municipal maneuvering. Mr. Morrison, Webb greeted him with the same cold smile Jake remembered from 3 years earlier. I let myself in. Hope you don't mind. Jake's hands clenched involuntarily. Breaking and entering is still illegal in Millbrook, Webb. Merely letting myself into the home of a business associate, Webb corrected smoothly, stepping aside to let Jake enter his own house. We have matters to discuss. The sight of Webb in his living room, the space where he and Emma had built their new life, where Victoria had helped classify rocks and shared dinner conversations, felt like a violation. Jake remained standing, unwilling to play along with the pretense of a civil meeting. We have nothing to discuss, he said flatly. Get out of my house? Webb ignored him, moving to examine the family photos on the mantel. Charming home. Very rustic. Quite a change from your condo in Cambridge. He picked up a photo of Emma and Sarah, studying it with calculated interest. Your late wife, I presume. Tragic story. Cancer, wasn't it? The casual mention of Sarah sent a surge of rage through Jake, but he forced himself to remain calm. Webb was deliberately provoking him, using the same psychological tactics that had worked so effectively during the whistleblowing case. State your business and leave, Jake said, his voice dangerously quiet. Webb replaced the photo with theatrical care. Very well, direct as always. He turned to face Jake fully. Victoria Chen has made a serious miscalculation. The board may have temporarily appeased her by canceling the Millbrook project, but there are other ways to achieve our objectives. Such as breaking into my house, Jake asked sarcastically. such as offering you what you really want. Webb countered, reaching into his jacket to produce an envelope. $5 million, Mr. Morrison. Compensation for your unfortunate separation from TechFlow 3 years ago. No admission of wrongdoing, of course, but a generous acknowledgement that perhaps things could have been handled differently. Jake stared at the envelope, momentarily speechless. You're trying to buy me off. I'm offering restitution, Webb corrected. $5 million would secure your daughter's education, expand your business, perhaps even allow you to return to engineering if you wished. All we ask in return is your support for a revised Millbrook project and your agreement to encourage Victoria to sever all ties with the situation. The sheer audacity of the offer left Jake feeling as if he'd stepped into an alternate reality. Let me get this straight. You destroyed my career, contributed to my wife's suffering during her final months, and now you're offering me money to help you undermine the woman who sacrificed her position to protect this town. Webb's expression remained impassive. I'm offering you an opportunity to secure your daughter's future. Victoria Chen made her choice. She'll land on her feet, people with her connections always do. The question is whether you'll continue to allow her misguided crusade to impact your family's well-being. Jake took a step forward, his voice low and controlled despite the anger coursing through him. Get out, now. Don't be hasty, Webb advised, laying the envelope on the coffee table. $5 million is life-changing money. Morrison, think of Emma. I am thinking of Emma, Jake replied. I'm thinking about what kind of father she deserves, one who stands by his principles, or one who sells out the moment the price is right. Webb's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing the contempt beneath. Principals won't pay for college or medical emergencies. Ask yourself what Sarah would want for her daughter. The mention of Sarah's name again pushed Jake to his limit. Sarah would want Emma to grow up knowing that integrity matters more than money. Now get out of my house before I call Sheriff Dawson and have you arrested for breaking and entering. Webb straightened his jacket, his expression hardening. You're making a serious mistake. This offer expires when I leave Millbrook tonight. Then it expires? Yeah, Jake said firmly. I'm not interested in blood money, especially not from the man who tried to bury safety concerns that could have killed people. Something dangerous flickered in Webb's eyes. Be careful, Morrison. Your quaint little life here could disappear as quickly as your engineering career did. Is that a threat? Jake asked, his voice steady despite the implied menace. Webb moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. Merely an observation about the fragility of small-town businesses. So many things can go wrong, fires, health code violations, tax audits. He smiled thinly. Victoria Chen isn't the only one who made a sacrifice today. Remember that when you're turning down $5 million. After Webb left, Jake stood motionless in his living room, the envelope still lying on his coffee table like a snake coiled to strike. The familiar cold fury he had felt 3 years ago during the TechFlow battle had returned along with something new, a protective instinct that extended beyond Emma to include Victoria. He picked up his phone and called Dawson. Webb was just here, broke into my house, tried to bribe me with $5 million to support the project and convince Victoria to back off completely. That's a serious allegation, Dawson said, his voice sharpening. You want to file a formal complaint? Jake considered this. Not yet, but I wanted you to know he's escalating. He made veiled threats about my business workers' health violations audits. Classic intimidation, Dawson observed grimly. I'll keep an eye on him while he's in town. And Jake, maybe don't leave Emma alone until this blows over. After hanging up, Jake retrieved his daughter from Mrs. Peterson's and focused on their dinner preparations, determined to maintain normalcy despite the disturbing encounter with Webb. Emma's excited chatter about rock formations and the promised pasta dinner provided a welcome distraction from his darker thoughts. It was nearly 7 when Victoria texted that she was 30 minutes from Millbrook. Jake replied with a warning about Webb's visit, an offer adding that dinner would be waiting whenever she arrived. Her response was characteristically direct. Not surprised by Webb's tactics. Don't worry about me. I've dealt with Marcus for years. Looking forward to pasta and normalcy. The casual confidence in her message reassured Jake somewhat, though he remained alert as he finished dinner preparations, checking the windows periodically for any sign of Webb's return. Victoria arrived just as Jake was setting the table, knocking lightly on the door, rather than using the doorbell to avoid waking Emma, who had fallen asleep on the couch while waiting. When Jake opened the door, he was struck by the transformation. Gone was any trace of the corporate CEO. Victoria wore jeans, a simple sweater, and minimal makeup, looking more like the Vicky who had first visited his garage than the executive who had faced down a corporate board. "Hi," she said simply, a tentative smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Sorry I'm late." "You're right on time," Jake assured her, surprised by how naturally she fit into the picture of his home despite everything. Emma tried to wait up, but second-grade excitement has its limits. Victoria glanced at the sleeping child on the couch, her expression softening. "Poor thing. Should we wake her for dinner?" The casual we, the easy assumption of shared decision-making, struck Jake forcefully. "Let her sleep a bit longer. She was determined to celebrate your bravery, even though I couldn't really explain what happened." Victoria followed him to the kitchen, the domesticity of the moment strange yet comfortable. "How do you explain corporate politics to an 8-year-old? I compared it to you giving up something important to help others," Jake said, retrieving plates from the cabinet. "She compared it to me using Sarah's scarf to save you." Victoria paused in the act of helping with the table setting, visibly touched. "That's remarkably accurate, actually." They worked in companionable silence for a moment, moving around the kitchen with the coordination of people becoming familiar with each other's rhythms. Finally, Jake asked the question that had been hovering since her call. "How are you really losing your position as CEO? Can't be easy, no matter how principled the reason." Victoria considered this as she filled water glasses. "Honestly, I'm still processing. 15 years of my life were dedicated to climbing TechFlow's corporate ladder. My identity was completely wrapped up in that role." She set down the pitcher, meeting his gaze directly. "But when the board presented their ultimatum, step down or watch them override my decision about Millbrook, I realized something important." "What's that?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. "That I cared more about preventing another Bakersville, another community destroyed by a corporate irresponsibility, than I cared about my title or stock options." She smiled slightly. It was surprisingly liberating to discover that. The simple sincerity in her voice touched something in Jake that had been closed off since Sarah's death, a recognition of shared values that transcended their complicated history. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think you made the right choice, and not just because it protected Millbrook." Victoria raised an eyebrow. No, Jake confirmed, "because it protected your integrity. I learned the hard way that you can rebuild a career, but you can't rebuild self-respect once you've compromised it." The moment between them deepened, charged with mutual understanding that went beyond words. They might have continued if not for a sleepy voice from the doorway. "Vicky, you came back." Emma stood rubbing her eyes, her hair tousled from her impromptu nap. Victoria turned with a warm smile. "I promised, didn't I? And I heard you're planning a celebration." Emma's face brightened instantly. "Dad made the pasta you liked, and I organized all my metamorphic samples for you to see after dinner." "I can't think of a better evening," Victoria said with genuine enthusiasm. As they settled around the table, Jake found himself observing the easy rapport between Victoria and Emma, the way his daughter lit up under Victoria's attentive questions, the natural affection in Victoria's expression as she listened to Emma's detailed rock classification theories. There was a rightness to the scene that both comforted and unsettled him. The dinner conversation flowed naturally, deliberately avoiding corporate drama in favor of Emma's school stories and Victoria's childhood memories of science projects. It wasn't until Emma had been tucked into bed extracting a promise from Victoria to check her rock identifications in the morning that the adults returned to the serious matters at hand. "Webb threatened you," Victoria said with light preamble as they settled on the porch with their now customary evening coffee. "Your text was vague on details." Jake sighed, the comfort of dinner giving way to the reality of their situation. "He broke in while I was picking up Emma, offered me $5 million to support a revised project and convince you to back off." Victoria's expression hardened. Classic Marcus. When authority fails, try bribery. "When I refused, he moved to threats, veiled implications about fires, health code problems, tax audits." Jake studied her reaction. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not," Victoria admitted. "I've watched Marcus operate for years. He views people as either assets or obstacles. Assets get rewards, obstacles get eliminated." The matter-of-fact assessment sent a chill through Jake. You think he's actually dangerous? Victoria considered this carefully. Physically, probably not directly. But Marcus has connections everywhere and no ethical boundaries. He once arranged a drunk driving arrest for a journalist who was investigating Richard Blackstone's past. The charges were eventually dropped, but the reporter's credibility was damaged enough to kill the story. The information confirmed Jake's worst suspicions about Webb. Dawson's keeping an eye on him, but we should be careful, especially with Emma. Victoria nodded, her expression grave. Marcus is scheduled to leave Millbrook tomorrow after a final council meeting. Once he's gone, the immediate threat should diminish. And then what? Jake asked the question, encompassing far more than just Webb's departure. Victoria looked out at the quiet street, the vulnerability she rarely showed evident in her profile. That's the question, isn't it? For the first time in my adult life, I don't have a meticulously planned next step. You have options, Jake pointed out. With your credentials and connections, you could walk into a dozen executive positions tomorrow. I could, Victoria agreed, but today made me question whether that's what I want anymore. She turned to face him fully. The past week in Millbrook, helping Emma with her rocks, having dinner with actual conversation, feeling like part of something real, it's made me realize how much I've sacrificed for corporate success. The candor in her voice made Jake's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. What are you saying? I'm saying, Victoria hesitated, clearly moving into unfamiliar emotional territory. I'm saying that perhaps losing my position as CEO isn't the worst thing that could have happened. Maybe it's an opportunity to redefine success on different terms. Before Jake could respond, his phone rang, Sheriff Dawson's number flashing on the screen. He answered immediately, his instincts already on alert. Morrison. Dawson's voice was tense. There's a situation at the mill site. Multiple TechFlow vehicles just arrived with the construction equipment. Webb's there directing operations, claiming he has emergency authorization from the town council to begin preliminary work. Jake's eyes met Victoria's, sharing the shock and outrage that Webb would move so brazenly against the board's decision. That's impossible. The board canceled the project this morning. Webb's telling a different story, Dawson replied grimly. Says the interim CEO Winters reversed the decision after you left. He's got paperwork that looks official, but something feels off. Victoria was already on her feet, her expression shifting from former CEO to strategic fighter. We need to get there now. Webb's trying to create a fait accompli before anyone can stop him. We're heading out, Jake told Dawson. Can you call Mrs. Miller to stay with Emma? After making arrangements for Emma, Jake and Victoria drove toward the mill site, the tension in the truck palpable. Victoria was already on her phone trying to reach Elaine Winters to confirm whether Webb's claimed authorization was legitimate. Elaine's not answering, she said finally, frustration evident in her voice. But there's no way she reversed the decision this quickly, not without board approval. Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. So Webb's bluffing, gambling that by morning it will be too late to stop the project. Exactly, Victoria confirmed. It's a desperate move, but effective. Once the land is cleared and foundations are poured, the environmental and financial arguments for stopping become much weaker. As they approached the mill site, the scale of Webb's operation became clear. Powerful floodlights illuminated the area where multiple pieces of heavy equipment were already at work clearing trees. A security checkpoint had been established at the entrance, with guards checking identification. Jake parked a short distance away, out of sight of the security team. How do we get past them? Victoria's expression was determined, a glimpse of the CEO authority she'd wielded just hours earlier. I may not be TechFlow's CEO anymore, but most of these workers won't know that yet. The press release only went out 3 hours ago. She pulled out her phone and quickly adjusted her appearance, hair up, expression stern, posture straightened. Even in jeans and a sweater, the transformation was remarkable. The woman beside Jake was suddenly every inch the corporate executive, radiating authority and confidence. Follow my lead, she said, and whatever happens, remember that Marcus Webb is fighting for his professional life right now. That makes him more dangerous than ever. Victoria strode toward the security checkpoint with the confident posture of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority. Jake followed a half step behind, marveling at her transformation from the casual dinner companion of just minutes ago to this commanding presence. Victoria Chen, TechFlow Industries, she announced crisply to the guard, who straightened immediately at her tone. Who authorized this operation? The guard consulted his clipboard nervously. Mr. Webb, ma'am, he said it was an emergency acceleration of the project timeline. I see. Victoria's voice could have frozen water. And did Mr. Webb mention that the board voted this morning to suspend this project indefinitely? No, ma'am, the guard admitted, clearly uncomfortable. He just said we had new authorization and needed to begin immediately. Call your supervisor, Victoria instructed. Now. As the guard radioed for his superior, Jake spotted Sheriff Dawson's cruiser parked near the site entrance, its lights off but clearly positioned to monitor the situation. Victoria caught his eye and gave a subtle nod. They had backup if needed. A site manager hurried over his expression, shifting from annoyance to uncertainty when he recognized Victoria. Ms. Chen, we were told you were no longer involved with this project. That's partially correct, Victoria replied with dangerous calm. I am no longer CEO of TechFlow as of this afternoon. What remains incorrect is the assertion that this project has been reauthorized. It has not. The manager glanced between Victoria and Jake, clearly trying to assess the situation. Mr. Webb provided documentation signed by an Elaine Winters, identifying her as interim CEO. May I see this documentation? Victoria asked, extending her hand with such natural authority that the manager produced the papers without hesitation. Victoria scanned the documents quickly, her expression hardening. These are forgeries. Ms. Winters would never authorize this project without board approval, which was explicitly denied this morning. She handed the papers to Jake. Note the signature, it doesn't match Elaine's. Marcus has become desperate. The manager paled visibly. If these are forged, then you're participating in an unauthorized corporate action that could result in significant legal consequences, Victoria finished for him. I suggest you halt operations immediately until this can be clarified. While the manager radioed instructions to stop the equipment, Jake spotted Marcus Webb emerging from a trailer set up as a temporary office. Webb's expression shifted from satisfaction to shock when he recognized Victoria, followed quickly by the calculated calm that Jake remembered all too well from their earlier confrontations. Victoria, Webb called as he approached. This is a surprise. I thought you'd be in Boston clearing out your office. And I thought you'd respect the board's decision, Victoria countered evenly. Yet here you are, Marcus, forging authorization documents and attempting to create facts on the ground. Webb's smile never reached his eyes. Strong accusation from a former CEO. Elaine Winters fully supports this project. Ask her yourself. I intend to, Victoria replied. But as it happens, I just got off the phone with Gerald Harrington, who confirmed the board's decision stands. No work is authorized in Millbrook. Jake knew this was a bluff. Victoria hadn't been able to reach anyone from the board, but Webb hesitated just long enough to suggest uncertainty about whether she was telling the truth. This town needs this project, Webb said, changing tactics. The economic benefits are not worth the environmental and community cost. Jake interrupted, stepping forward. The board agreed with that assessment this morning. The only person who seems unable to accept it is you, Webb. Webb's facade of professional calm cracked slightly. You turned down $5 million for this, for a principal, for her. He gestured dismissively toward Victoria. She used you to protect her corporate reputation, Morrison. Nothing more. You're wrong, Jake said simply. Victoria gave up her position to protect Millbrook. Unlike you, she understands that some things matter more than corporate advancement. Sheriff Dawson approached, having evidently decided the confrontation warranted his intervention. Everything all right here? No, Victoria answered firmly. Mr. Webb is attempting to proceed with a project that has been officially canceled by TechFlow's board of directors. He has forged authorization documents and misled these workers. Dawson turned to Webb, his expression hardening. That true? Of course not, Webb scoffed. This is simply a corporate dispute that Ms. Chen is personalizing because of her connection to Mr. Morrison. Then you won't mind if we verify the authorization? Dawson suggested reasonably. I can call Ms. Winters directly. I believe the TechFlow press release announcing the leadership change included her contact information. For the first time, Webb looked genuinely cornered. His gaze darted between Victoria, Jake, and the sheriff, calculating options that were rapidly diminishing. This is absurd, he attempted. A small-town sheriff interfering in corporate operations based on the word of a disgruntled former employee and a mechanic. Former senior engineer, Jake corrected quietly, whose safety concerns you buried 3 years ago, resulting in a product recall, that could have been avoided. The words hung in the air, carrying the weight of long-suppressed truth. Several of the workers nearby had stopped to listen, their expressions shifting from confusion to concern. Sheriff Victoria said, her voice calm but carrying, "I believe the unauthorized removal of trees from this site constitutes environmental damage to protected land. Would your department have jurisdiction over such activities?" "Absolutely," Dawson confirmed, "especially with questions about proper authorization." Webb's professional mask slipped, completely revealing the raw anger beneath. "You've destroyed your career for nothing, Victoria. This town will get its data center with or without your approval. The board will reconsider once they see the financial projections." "Perhaps," Victoria acknowledged, "but it won't happen tonight, and it won't happen under false pretenses." She turned to the site manager, who had been watching the exchange with growing alarm. "I suggest you contact TechFlow's legal department directly for clarification. In the meantime, any continued work here could expose your company to significant liability." The manager nodded immediately, ordering the remaining equipment powered down. Webb watched with poorly concealed fury as his hastily assembled operation ground to a halt. "This isn't over," he warned, his voice low enough that only Jake and Victoria could hear. "You've made powerful enemies today." "No, Marcus," Victoria replied calmly. "It is over. The only question is whether you leave Millbrook with your professional reputation intact or in handcuffs for document forgery." Something in her tone, absolute certainty combined with genuine pity, seemed to finally penetrate Webb's anger. His shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, the fight visibly draining from him. "You were Richard's protege," he said almost to himself. "I never understood why he chose you. Now I do." With a final contemptuous glance at Jake, he turned and walked back toward the temporary office. Sheriff Dawson stepped closer. "Want me to detain him?" Victoria considered this, then shook her head. "Not necessary. Without workers or equipment, he can't do any more damage tonight. By morning, the board will have confirmed the project cancellation, and Marcus will have no choice but to accept defeat." As the workers began packing up equipment and security started dismantling the checkpoint, Jake and Victoria walked back toward his truck, the tension of confrontation slowly easing from their shoulders. "That was impressive," Jake said quietly. "For someone who's no longer CEO, you still command quite a presence." Victoria smiled, the professional mask falling away to reveal the woman beneath. "Authority isn't just about titles. It's about certainty and conviction." She glanced back at the mill site where Webb could be seen angrily packing documents into a briefcase. Marcus never understood that. He thought power came from manipulation and fear. "And what do you think now?" Jake asked. "About power, about success, all of it." Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I think success is finding purpose that aligns with your values. Power is having the courage to act on that alignment, even when it costs you." The simple wisdom of her answer resonated deeply with Jake, echoing his own hard-won perspective after losing everything 3 years earlier. "We should get back," he said finally. "Mrs. Miller will be wondering what happened." Soon. 6 months later, the summer sun warmed the expanded deck behind Jake's house, where picnic tables had been set up for Emma's 9th birthday party. Children darted between tables high on cake and excitement, while parents chatted in small groups, enjoying the perfect June weather. Jake stood by the grill flipping burgers and watching Emma proudly show off her expanded rock collection to a circle of fascinated friends. The display had been mounted on a specially designed stand that Victoria had helped build, complete with proper museum-style labels and LED lighting to highlight crystalline structures. "Need help?" Victoria appeared beside him, carrying a tray of sliced tomatoes and lettuce. She looked completely at ease in jeans and a casual blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, a far cry from the corporate executive who had arrived in Millbrook 6 months earlier. "I think I've got the grill under control," Jake replied with a smile. "But you could grab the cheese from the refrigerator." As Victoria moved toward the house, Jake found himself appreciating how naturally she had integrated into their lives. After the confrontation with Webb, she had returned to Boston only long enough to clear out her apartment and finalize her separation from TechFlow. Within a month, she had rented a small house on the other side of Millbrook and established a technology consulting firm that helped local businesses modernize their operations. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Some townspeople had initially viewed her with suspicion, associating her with the TechFlow controversy. But Victoria's genuine commitment to the community volunteering at the school, helping small businesses navigate technology challenges, sponsoring the local Little League team, had gradually won people over. Most importantly, her relationship with Emma had deepened into something special. What had started with rock classification had expanded to science projects, stargazing sessions, and weekend geology expeditions. Victoria brought knowledge and perspective that complemented Jake's parenting perfectly, creating a balance that had been missing since Sarah's death. And then there was what had developed between Jake and Victoria themselves, in a relationship built on mutual respect, shared values, and the unique understanding that came from having faced similar challenges. They had taken things slowly, mindful of Emma's feelings and the complexity of their history, but the connection had deepened steadily, surprising them both with its strength and naturalness. Victoria returned with the cheese, sliding it onto the table beside him. Mrs. Peterson says the cake is a masterpiece. She's taking full credit for the fondant geology layers. Jake laughed. As she should. I certainly couldn't have managed that level of dessert engineering. Speaking of engineering, Victoria said more quietly, did you look at those schematics I left on your desk, the battery management system redesign? Jake nodded, flipping another burger. I did. Your improvements to the thermal regulation algorithm are brilliant, much more elegant than my original design. I disagree, Victoria countered. Your original concept was revolutionary. I just tweaked some efficiency parameters. The easy exchange of technical ideas had become a comfortable part of their relationship. 3 months earlier, Victoria had convinced Jake to join her consulting firm as a partner, allowing him to return to engineering while maintaining the garage as a community anchor. The arrangement had proven surprisingly successful, combining his mechanical expertise with her business acumen. Dad, Vicky, Emma called from across the yard. Come see my new metamorphic display. They exchanged a smile at Emma's enthusiasm before heading over to properly admire the exhibit. As they walked, Victoria's hand found Jake's, their fingers intertwining with comfortable familiarity. The birthday party continued into early evening, transitioning from chaotic children's celebration to quieter gathering as guests gradually departed. By sunset, only Mrs. Miller and Sheriff Dawson remained helping clean up, while Emma sorted through her presents. Quite a different scene from last fall, Dawson observed, helping Jake fold tables. Hard to believe it's been only 6 months since the TechFlow drama. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime, Jake agreed, glancing toward Victoria, who was helping Emma organize her new science books. You know, Dawson said thoughtfully, I was skeptical when she first stayed in town. Thought maybe it was guilt or some kind of corporate damage control strategy. Jake raised an eyebrow. And now, Dawson chuckled, now I think she might be the best thing that's happened to Millbrook since you decided to open that garage. The tech training program she started at the high school has given those kids opportunities they never would have had otherwise. After the final guest departed, Jake, Victoria, and Emma sat on the porch steps watching fireflies illuminate the summer twilight. Emma leaned against Victoria's shoulder, half asleep after the excitement of her special day. Did you have a good birthday, Em? Jake asked softly. Emma nodded drowsily. The best. I got all the rocks I wanted, plus the microscope, and everyone came. She looked up at Victoria. Even Mom was here. I could feel her. Victoria's eyes met Jake's over Emma's head, sharing a moment of profound understanding. I think she's always with you, Victoria said gently, in the stars on your ceiling and in your heart. And in my rocks, Emma added seriously. Mom started my collection, then Dad kept it going, and now you help me classify everything properly. It's like a family project. The simple observation carried a weight of meaning that none of them could fully articulate. After Emma had finally been tucked into bed, Jake and Victoria returned to the porch with their customary evening coffee. Family project, Jake repeated thoughtfully. Interesting choice of words. Victoria smiled, gazing out at the quiet street. She sees things clearly, your daughter. Our daughter, Jake corrected softly. At least that's how she thinks of you now. Victoria's breath caught her eyes meeting his with sudden vulnerability. Jake? I'm not trying to pressure you, he assured her quickly. I know we agreed to take things slowly, but Emma's not wrong about what we've become, the three of us. Victoria set down her coffee cup, turning to face him fully. These past 6 months have given me something I never knew I was missing. Purpose beyond professional achievement. Connection that doesn't depend on position or power. She took his hand. I've found a home here, not just in Millbrook, but with you and Emma. Jake squeezed her hand gently. Sarah once told me that love isn't about replacing what you've lost. It's about making room for what you found. Wise woman, Victoria said softly. Very, Jake agreed, and I think she would approve of how her rock collection turned out. Victoria laughed, the sound carrying across the summer evening like music. A family project that started with one small stone and just kept growing. As they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge above Millbrook, Jake reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A car accident in unseasonable snow, a red knit scarf pressed against a bleeding temple, a whistleblower and a CEO finding unexpected common ground in a small Vermont town. Sometimes rescue came in forms you never expected, and the things worth walking away from were not always what they appeared to be.